Wastler's audiobooks. The Orchard, at the Edge of Eden. Written and produced by Lee Wastler. Read by, a computer. I'm Mr. Wastler, hoping you enjoy this story about an old orchard and how it can lead to redemption. Thank you for listening. And a special thank you to WKRDradio.com.
The Orchard at the Edge of Eden by Lee Wastler. Third book in his Redemption series. Chapter 1, The Keys and the Bruised Pear. The envelope didn't belong with the coupons and dentist reminders. Heavy paper, pale cream, the corner stamped Alder and Crane, attorneys at law. Carol turned it once in her hands, thumb tracing the raised letters, then slid the old paring knife beneath the flap. The blade wobbled. Lee always meant to tighten the handle. She kept meaning to learn how. 2 keys slid onto the table. One brass, warm and familiar. One iron, cold and old-fashioned, its bow shaped like a leaf. A letter followed, folded into thirds as neat as a church bulletin. Brandon clomped in from the porch, kicked his boots against the mat, and still managed a little parade of mud across the linoleum. "Sorry," he said out of habit. He stopped when he saw the keys. "What's that?" "Let me read," Carol said. She held the letter close enough to smell the paper, a faint, clean scent like new envelopes. Her name in print, Carol Wastler, and beneath it, the careful legal river of bequest, no known heirs, property therein described. She read it twice, then a third time for the parts her brain tried to skip. "It's an orchard," she said finally, lowering the page. "Mr. Alder left it to us, out on Briar Hollow Road." Katie paused in the doorway with a dish towel, hair pinned up messily with a pencil. "Mr. Alder with the honey. He brought pears to the church sale." Carol nodded. Finding air in her chest was suddenly work. She remembered the mason jars lined on their counter, how Lee held one to the light and called it Bottled September. She remembered Mr. Alder's warm, rough hands at the funeral and the way he had said, "Your Lee helped me once. I don't forget kindness like it was a pledge, not small talk." Brandon picked up the iron key and tested its weight. "We can just have it." "That's what it says." Carol's voice surprised her by sounding steady. The brass key glinted against the table's fake oak grain. Outside, a truck bumped past and the dishes in the cabinet rattled like the house was clearing its throat. "We'll go look," she said. "Tonight." They ate quick scrambled eggs, toast, leftover roasted potatoes, then piled into the old sedan. The dashboard clock was off by 20 minutes, it always had been. Windows cracked, the car took on the evening, damp earth, a twist of lilac-cut grass. The long winter had finally stepped back. Carol could feel that small mercy in her shoulders. Briar Hollow Road narrowed after the last ranch house. Fences leaned. The pavement frayed at the edges into gravel and grass. When the orchard appeared, it did not announce itself with a postcard view. It simply continued the road's quiet and gave it a reason. A wooden sign on the fence read Alder Orchard, paint peeled to the soft gray of old bones. Someone had tied green ribbon around the gatepost long ago. It fluttered lazily, faded to the color of a memory. A tractor path swung away into trees that stood in rows, their branches a tangle of new leaves and last year's intentions. Bees drifted by 1 and 2, unhurried and sure. Brandon had the sedan door open before the engine died. He tested the gate. Locked. "Try the leaf," Carol said, passing him the iron key. He fed it into the big square lock. It turned with a tired, honest click, the sound of something that hadn't lied to you in years. As the gate swung, cool air slid out, green and faintly sweet. Not fruit yet, more the idea of fruit. Carol felt it touch her face like an unseen hand and had the strange sense of being welcomed by a place. She stepped onto the grass. "Smells like when we used to go picking," Katie said softly. Before. They walked in. The ground dipped and rose gently. Grass reached to their knees, seated heads brushing denim. Here and there, a low wooden ladder leaned against a trunk. A line of blue rain barrels stood sentry along the shed. Handwritten signs, weathered but legible, marked rows in Mr. Alder's careful block letters. Bosque, Anjou, Sekel. Each word was a little hymn. Brandon drifted toward a hand pump near the shed as if drawn by an invisible rope. He set a palm to the handle, leaned his weight into it, and pumped. Nothing. He crouched, peered, rattled, sniffed, the way he did with every broken thing since he was small, like he could listen his way into its secrets. "Dry. Lines are probably clogged," he said, not discouraged. "We'll flush them." Katie ran her fingertips down the gray skin of a trunk, then stepped back to sketch the angle of 2 branches with the pencil from her hair. Her lines came quick and sure. Curve, notch, a suggestion of shade. "Mrs. D'Angelo swore Mr. Alder's pears tasted like late sunshine," she murmured. "She said the skins had gold freckles." Carol let her own hand rest against the bark. The tree felt cool, ridged, alive in a quietly stubborn way. A picture reached for her. Lee in this light, grinning with pear juice shining on his wrist, Katie's soundless laugh behind a book, Brandon pretending not to be amused and failing. The ache rose and she let it pass through, not around. Katie stopped by a low branch and went still. "There's a pear," she said, surprised into a whisper. The fruit hung too early and too small, months ahead of schedule, with a coin-sized bruise like a bad thought. "Leave it," Brandon said, not unkindly. "You'll get sick." Katie cradled the pear like a found bird. "Can I take it? We can try to help it." Carol almost said no. Don't pick, don't touch, don't break what isn't yours. The words of a life held together by caution, but Katie's hands were careful. "Okay," she said. "We'll see." An SUV slid up to the gate, quiet as a thought. New paint, new money. A man stepped out, tie loose, smile looser. "Beautiful evening," he called, as if he'd arranged it. "You must be the Wastlers, Lyle Carr." He walked like he expected the ground to help. He offered his hand. Carol took it because her mother had raised her to be polite. His palm was cool and expensive. "We just arrived," she said. "Of course." He spread his hands, taking in the orchard with admiring ownership. "I keep an eye on Briar Hollow. This place has always had potential." He smiled as if confiding. "I develop projects that bless communities. When Mr. Alder passed, everyone wondered, what next? I thought I'd welcome you and say, well, if next is a worry, I can help. I've got a vision, small retreat center, farm market, job creation. Keeps the orchard spirit alive without all the..." His hand indicated the grass, the weeds, the work, mess. He offered a card, heavy stock, raised lettering, even the edges felt ambitious. "We'll need time," Carol said. She tucked the card into her jacket pocket where it sat like a small, firm voice. "Time is my favorite ingredient," Lyle said lightly. His eyes flicked to the pear in Katie's hands, for a heartbeat. Something in his face sharpened, interest, recognition, hunger, then smoothed. "Let me send a crew to haul brush free of charge, as a neighborly start." "We'll think about it," Carol said. Her fingers brushed the iron key in her pocket, and she had the odd sensation of holding 2 offers at once. "Perfect," Lyle said, already stepping back. "I'll check in next week. Be well." He dipped his head to Brandon and Katie like a man on an easy stage, then slid back into the SUV. The vehicle whispered away down Briar Hollow, leaving a faint cologne and the sense of a plan that didn't ask permission. Brandon watched the tail lights until they fell into curves of trees. "He's going to try to buy this out from under us," he said. "Maybe he does want to help," Katie said, though she didn't sound convinced. She looked at the pear. "It feels sad." "Fruit doesn't feel," Brandon said, but his voice softened. Carol took in the row of rain barrels, the pump, the ladders, the tired fence. Work everywhere, yes, but also the bones of something good. "Let's head home," she said. "We'll talk it through, we'll pray." The word came out before she could catch it. It hung between them like a fragile glass that might drop or be held. Back in their kitchen, evening pooled in the corners. The envelope lay open on the table like a white mouth. Carol set the keys by the sink, then the pear in a shallow bowl. Up close, the bruise looked worse, inky at the center, browned around the edges like a spreading worry. Brandon planted his palms on the counter. Katie stood on tiptoe, chin just level with the bowl. Carol picked up the paring knife, then set it back down. A small, stubborn thought rose in her like a bubble. Ask. "Let me try something," she said. She placed 2 fingers lightly on the pear's damaged skin. The fruit felt cool, cool like the orchard air had felt on her face. "Please," she whispered. She didn't build a speech around it. She didn't direct it at the ceiling. She simply aimed the word at the one who had heard her fury and her silence for 2 years, and for reasons she did not understand, loved her still. Warmth gathered under her fingertips. Not magic show heat. More like the heat of a hand held, like the way a mug is warm when someone you love passes it to you. Katie's eyes widened. Brandon leaned closer, skeptical and wanting not to be. Carol lifted the knife and cut. The blade glided. She turned the pear halves apart like opening a door. The bruise was gone. The flesh inside glowed with a late summer cream. A bright, clean perfume rose, August and May. Without meaning to, Carol laughed. It startled her, a quick, breathy sound she hadn't made in that kitchen in a long time. Brandon took a slice, bit down, and closed his eyes. Surprise gave way to something like relief. "It's really good," he said, amazed by the plainness of the words. Katie cupped her half like a secret. Instead of eating, she raised it to her ear the way she did seashells at the beach when she was small. "It's not sad anymore," she murmured, smiling. "It's saying thank you." Carol leaned on the counter because her knees had gone oddly loose. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the kitchen clock, the quiet breathing of her children in the next second before speech returned to the room. She thought of Mr. Alder's careful block letters. She thought of Lyle's perfect card. She thought of Lee, who would have said, "Look at that," in a grin you could not help but answer. "Okay," she said, still looking at the pear because looking anywhere else felt like it would break something delicate and good. "We're going to try." Brandon wiped juice from his thumb onto his jeans and didn't get scolded. "Try what?" "To take care of the orchard," Carol said. "Not to own it, to tend it." Brandon picked up the keys, one in each hand. Metal chimed softly. He weighed them like a scale, brass against iron, new against old, offer against offer. "If that guy comes back, I'll be here." "We'll be here," Carol said. "Together." They rinsed the knife. Katie fished the pear seeds from the cutting board with the tip of a spoon and set them in a jam jar lid on the sill, then labeled a strip of masking tape Briar Hollow, first try in her tidy print. Out front, the maple lifted its hands in the slow wave trees use for hello and amen. Carol clicked off the kitchen light. For a heartbeat, the cut pear on the counter seemed to hold the day, one thin, defiant second of glow, like a promise that didn't need to be loud to be true. Then the room was ordinary again. Ordinary and not. She touched the iron key in her pocket and felt it hum against her leg. Not a sound exactly, but a note you could almost hear if you leaned in. She didn't know what came next. She did know this. They would go back tomorrow with work gloves and a thermos. Brandon would tinker. Katie would draw. She would learn the pump, the barrels, the ladders, the pace of a place that didn't rush, and maybe the prayer that matched it. "Good night," she said to the quiet house, to the pear seeds, to the ache that had learned to live at the base of her ribs. "Night," Brandon called from the hallway. "Good night," Katie sang softly, already turning the day into pictures. The keys rested on the sill like 2 small moons. Somewhere at the edge of town, an orchard breathed in, breathed out, and waited. Chapter 2. The Trees That Remember. They came back the next afternoon with the things that mean business: work gloves, a bucket of hand tools, a thermos that sweated sweet tea, and the kind of sandwiches you make when you're not sure you'll remember to stop for dinner. Peanut butter, banana, honey. Brandon had a socket set in an old tackle box. Katie had her sketchbook, a roll of masking tape, and 3 pencils sharpened within an inch of their lives. Carol parked on the shoulder. The sun sat warm and honest over Briar Hollow. The ribbon on the gate stirred the way it had yesterday, as if waving them in. They walked the path and the orchard opened like a book that had been waiting to be read. Bees stitched between clover heads. The grass hissed softly around their knees. Carol felt foolish for liking the sound of their boots, their separate rhythms settling into a shared one. Clomp Brandon, step Carol, skip Katie, when she forgot to be quiet and then remembered. "Okay," Carol said, setting the thermos on an overturned crate like a small altar. "Let's make a plan." Brandon pointed with the blunt end of a wrench. "Pump first. If we can get water, everything else gets easier. After that, I want to cut the worst of the suckers and brush from around the trunks so they can breathe." "Breathe," Katie repeated, pleased by the word. She turned in a slow circle, squinting. "Mom, can I label the rows? The signs are almost gone. I want to get the names right." Carol smiled at the deliberate gentleness in that ask. "Labels it is," she said. "I'll start clearing around the barrels and the shed. I want to see what Mr. Alder kept." They split like a small crew that knew its work. Brandon knelt by the hand pump, knuckles already dirty just from thinking about the job. He unscrewed the cap, pulled the leather washer, frowned at it the way a teacher frowns at a lazy essay, then set to cleaning the seat with a rag and vinegar from an old jug in the shed. He hummed under his breath, a habit he'd picked up from Lee without meaning to. The sound made Carol's throat ache and then settle. Katie stood before the first rose peeling tag, Bosk. She wrote the name neatly on a strip of masking tape, tore it with her teeth, and stuck it to the trunk at eye level. Then she drew a quick little Bosk shape, a teardrop, a kiss. She did the same for Anjou rounded, for Seckle small, button-like, for a row labeled Comus where the sign had fallen and lay half under dandelions. She set the old sign back against the trunk and patted it, as if apologizing for the indignity of the ground. Carol hauled deadfall from around the blue rain barrels and found them clean inside, as if someone had rinsed them before winter with the tenderness of a person putting a child's shoes away. She propped their lids, checked the spigots, rolled one a foot to test its balance. At the shed door she paused, hand on the handle, surprised by her own flutter of nerves, as if opening it might let out more than spiders. The shed smelled like wood, oil, and summers. Hanging from nails were tools worn to the shape of work, a pruning saw with a taped handle, a coil of twine, a neatly bundled length of grafting tape, a row of jars with hand-lettered labels, blade oil, beeswax, linseed. A metal cabinet sat in the corner with its latch wired shut. On top of it, a wooden crate stenciled with GLEA, the rest rubbed away. Inside the crate, a stack of paper tags punched with holes and tied with faded twine. Names written in Mr. Alder's square hand. D'Angelo, Parker, Singh, Rosa, Mendoza, HWSTLER, Lee. Carol's finger hovered over the last one. She traced Lee's name, and the shed altered around her just a fraction as if a memory had stepped in, looked around, nodded. She swallowed. Next to the crate sat a little notebook the size of her palm, brown paper cover, corners softened. She flipped it open. Drawings simple as bread. A pear blossom labeled "Watch the Center" for Brown. A little sketch of a hand under a limb with "Leave 1" for the birds written below. Notes in the margin that read more like prayers than instructions. Water the thirsty, not the loud. Share with the hungry before weighing your own basket. When you cut, bless. If someone asks, say yes. And then, near the back, liturgy of TNDING, underlined twice. Carol leaned against the doorframe and read softly to the motes. Stand in the row. Say the names of those who ate here last season. Offer water to the least likely tree. Break bread. Leave some. Tell the truth out loud, even if no one's there but the bees. The gate brightens where truth is spoken and where the poor are remembered. She closed the book gently and slipped it into the pocket of her jacket. "Mr. Alder," she said into the shed's kind noise. "Thank you." Outside, Brandon whooped. "Mom, I think." She ran. Katie was already hopping through grass toward the pump. Brandon had reassembled the handle and was sawing up and down, shoulders working. The pump coughed once, a smoker's hack, then twice. On the third, a spurt of water leaped out like a joke told well. Rusty, yes, and smelling a little like pennies and old pipes, but wet and bright in the late light. "Ha!" Brandon yelled, and then laughed, an easy, boyish sound that lifted something sticky from Carol's chest. "It's pulling!" He grabbed a bucket, caught the water, dumped the first rusty rush into the grass, pumped again, caught more. "We'll run it until it clears." Katie clapped as if he'd performed a card trick. "Do I get to pour?" "You get to pour." Brandon grinned at her, the old companionable mischief peeking out. They took turns. Pump, catch, dump, pump. The water ran from brown to tea to pale straw to almost clear. Brandon tasted a drop off his thumb and made a face. "Not yet. We'll give the trees the first drink." "Start there," Carol said, pointing to a tree whose leaves had a slight gray tiredness to them, like they'd sat up too late watching over the hill. "Least likely tree." Brandon raised an eyebrow. "Least likely." "Mr. Alder's notes," Carol said, and felt the ridiculous pleasure of being able to say that. Mr. Alder's notes, like she'd been handed a recipe card from a grandparent. Katie carried the bucket like a procession. She tipped it slowly into the shallow basin at the trunk's base. The water ran around the roots and darkened the soil. For a second, nothing happened, and then, so subtle Carol would have missed it if she'd blinked, the leaves lifted a fraction, like someone hearing their name from a room they thought they were alone in. They watered another, then another. Not all the trees changed. Some sighed and said, "Thank you," in leaf language. Some held their tiredness the way shy people hold their eyes. This seemed fine to Carol. Not every thirsty thing rushes to the cup. "Mom," Katie said, standing with her hand on a trunk labeled HWASDLER, Lee, in Mr. Alder's tidy print. The tag hung from a bit of twine, sun-faded but legible. Someone had tied it there as if keeping a place at a table. Carol's mouth went dry. She reached out and touched the tag with the back of her fingers, as if it might cruelly shock at a direct touch. "He remembered," she whispered. She didn't know what Lee had done. She only knew it had been enough to put his name in a place that fed people. They poured water there, too. Brandon worked the pump like a man with purpose. Katie crouched, head bent, scribbling in her sketchbook between trips back and forth. When she stood, she'd taped a fresh label under the old tag. "Lee, thank you," in her small, careful hand. A familiar voice floated up the row. "Well, now, thought I saw your car." Carol turned. Pastor Rosa came walking down the tractor lane with a basket on her arm and a hat that had seen decades of gardens. She walked as if the ground had borrowed its confidence from her, not the other way around. "Pastor," Carol said, unexpected tears stinging quick and hot. "We're trying." "I can see that," Rosa said, taking in the pump, the bucket, the dark circles of fresh water around certain trunks. She set the basket on the crate by the thermos and opened it. Fresh rolls, still warm, wrapped in a flour-dusted towel. She pressed one into Brandon's hand before he could protest. "Eat. Work runs better oiled." Brandon bit, because his body remembered being small and obeyed good bread like a commandment. "Thank you," he said around warmth and crust. Rosa stepped close to the tree with Lee's tag and put her palm flat to the bark. "He used to come out with Mr. Alder on Saturdays." She smiled, the kind that felt like rain in August. Didn't matter if Lee was bone-tired. He'd haul ladders and try not to sing off-key. "We held gleaning days here. Take what you need. Leave some for the birds," he'd say. The birds appreciated it. Carol laughed unexpectedly. The sound startled her less this time. "We want to keep that going," she said. "We don't know how yet, but—" "But you will." Rosa squeezed her arm. Mr. Alder knew this place was a gate. He wouldn't have said it that way. He didn't like words that sounded like they thought too much of themselves. But he knew. When people came here and told the truth with their mouths full, the world went right by a notch. In the distance, a vehicle slowed on the road, then continued. Carol tried not to look. The orchard felt like a bowl catching sunlight, and she didn't want to drag in shadows by numbing them. "I'm going to fill these barrels," Brandon said, cracking his knuckles like a promise. "Then I'll check the line along the lower rows." "Take the hose from the shed," Rosa said. "It looks like snakes, but it's obedient." Katie laughed and darted toward the shed. She returned holding a coil of hose like a green question mark. Brandon threaded it onto the pump's spigot and began the slow, satisfying work of sending good water where it needed to go. Carol poured 2 cups of tea from the thermos and handed one to Rosa. The pastor held it without drinking, warming her old hands. "Do you remember the names?" Carol asked, nodding toward the crate of tags she'd found in the shed. "Some," Rosa said. She picked up a few, mouth moving as if tasting each. "D'Angelo, Parker, Singh, Mendoza." She turned one over and chuckled. "Ha, Rosa, don't let me cheat." "That's Mr. Alder, all right. He counted me honest and still kept me honest." Carol fetched the notebook from her pocket and opened it to the page that said Liturgy of Tending. Rosa's eyebrows rose and then lowered tenderly, like greeting a child she'd baptized. "Well then," she said, "if we're going to do it, let's do it right." They stood in the row. Rosa's voice was not loud, but it carried. "We remember," she said, and spoke the names off the tags, one by one. Carol repeated them, mouth learning the familiar shape of other people's stories. Katie whispered each as she wrote them onto fresh strips of tape, sticking the new labels beside the old as if tucking someone in. Brandon kept pumping, a rhythm under the words. "D'Angelo. Parker. Singh. Mendoza. Rosa, don't let me cheat. Lee Wastler." The words sat in the orchard air. They didn't fly away. They settled like birds on wire. Rosa broke a roll and handed pieces to each of them. "Leave some," she said, pinching a soft bit and placing it on the low wall of the raised bed near the shed. A sparrow dropped down almost immediately, took a crumb, cocked its head at them in polite inquiry, then flew off. "Good, the first congregant arrives." They ate in companionable silence. The bread was sweet and soft in the hand. Honey licked their fingers from the sandwiches they tore open. Carol wiped her thumb and didn't bother to be neat. Work has its own cleanliness. Somewhere behind the shed, a low hum deepened and shifted. Brandon paused, hand on the pump handle. "Bees," Katie said, eyes bright. "They're louder." They rounded the corner. A small box hive sat tucked under the eaves, the way you put a crib near a window. Yesterday it had looked as tired as everything else. Today, bees came and went with a purpose that felt like Sunday morning. One bumped Carol's sleeve and moved on, uninterested in fear. She realized she had been holding her breath and let it go. "They remember," Rosa said softly. "They always do if you give them something true to fly toward." "Pastor?" Carol asked, because the question had been packing in her since Lyle's card touched her palm. "If someone wants to turn this into something else, something polished and easy, how do we keep what matters?" "You practice," Rosa said simply. "You do small good things until the place itself knows you mean it. You make every decision at a table with other people, not alone with a pen and a dream. You tell the truth, and you accept help." Help showed up in the shape of Mr. Alder's neighbor, Mr. Alder's hat perched on his head now by grief or habit. Mr. Alder was gone. This was Mr. Pike, Carol reminded herself, though everyone still called him Limb Man for the way he could snake through branches. He raised a hand from the fence line. "Need a chainsaw," he called. "Got one that likes to show off." Carol laughed again, twice in one day. "We'd be grateful," she said. He set to with the ease of a person who has always looked for what needs doing and then done it, no committee required. He trimmed away the worst dead limbs, gentle as a barber, while Brandon worked the pump and Katie kept up her sacrament of labels. Carol and Rosa dragged brush to a ditch where Mr. Pike could haul it later. The air smelled like green things exhaling. Late sun slid down the rows, finding spider silk and making it into ribbons. The orchard changed almost imperceptibly, the way a room changes when laughter finally arrives and decides to stay. Carol felt it in her breath. She felt it in the way Brandon's shoulders sat lower than they had in months, in the way Katie's pencil moved without the little worried pause between lines. They were washing hands at the pump when a car slowed again on the road. The same quiet SUV. It didn't turn in, it rolled by in a way that could be called polite. A hand lifted briefly at the window, a shadow of a wave. Then it vanished behind the bend. "Eyes," Mr. Pike muttered without looking up. "Plenty of folks like to count other people's peaches before they're grown." Carol dried her hands on her jeans. "We'll count our own," she said. It came out firm without feeling hard. The words felt like they'd been waiting in her. They put tools away while there was still enough light to find the nails. Brandon coiled the hose in a neat circle like a sleeping snake. Katie cleaned pencil smudges from her page with the side of her hand and added a tiny sparrow to the corner. Carol slipped Mr. Alder's notebook back into the cabinet and left it on the top shelf where a hand could find it. Before they left, Carol stood in the row the notebook had told her to. She said the names again, a little louder, because practice makes memory. D'Angelo, Parker Singh, Mendoza, Rosa Lee. A breeze moved up the hill, and the leaves answered with a sound like soft applause. Tomorrow, she told the trees, feeling only slightly foolish, we'll bring rakes and a real lunch. Tomorrow, Brandon echoed, twirling the iron key on its ring and then catching it, the way you catch a prayer you didn't know you were praying. Tomorrow, Katie said, kissing her fingers and tapping the tag with Lee's name. She set the jar lid of pear seeds on the sill inside the shed where the morning light would find them. She wrote on a strip of tape and stuck it to the jar. First try, don't give up. They latched the shed. Carol pulled the gate closed and felt the key through the lock's familiar turn. The click sounded less tired, or maybe she was. On the walk to the car, the air tasted faintly of something sweet. Not the cloy of perfume. More like the clean hint that happens when you peel an orange in another room and someone smiles without knowing why. Do you hear that? Katie asked, cocking her head. Hear what? Brandon said. Nothing, Katie said, but her eyes were bright. It's a good nothing. They drove home dusty and hungry, the kind of hungry that belongs to people who earned it. Carol's hands were nicked and nicked again. She didn't mind. At a red light she glanced at them and thought, tending, not owning, and found she believed it a tiny bit more than she had yesterday. When they turned into their street, Brandon looked at the sky in the rearview mirror and said, mostly to himself, they looked different, the leaves. They remember, Carol said. She wasn't sure how she knew, she just did. Back in their kitchen, they set the tools by the door to trip over in the morning. Katie slid her sketches into a plastic sleeve like a librarian caring for old books. Brandon put the pump wrench on the counter as if it deserved a place of honor. Carol took the pear seeds from the sill and held one up to the light. It was just a small brown thing. It was also, possibly, everything. Thank you, she said out loud, to no one and to the one and to Mr. Alder and maybe to the trees. She didn't wait for an answer. She didn't need one. Outside, somewhere at the edge of town, the orchard breathed and remembered, and if anyone had been there to hear it, hummed a note that sounded like a promise kept. Chapter 3, Harvest of Confessions. They came early on Saturday, because work is best friends with morning. Carol set a folding table by the shed and covered it with a clean sheet, white, a little threadbare, the kind that makes new things look like gifts. She laid out plastic cups, a jar of honey with a spoon sticking up like a flag, a plate of sliced oranges, and a basket of rolls she'd traded Pastor Rosa for 2 quarts of soup. Katie made signs in her tidy print, asterisk, water, asterisk, bread, asterisk, please take some asterisk, and taped them down against the breeze. Brandon stood by the pump, rolling his shoulders like a pitcher before the first throw. Today we try the liturgy, Carol said, half to the kids, half to the orchard. She had Mr. Alder's notebook in her pocket, the page with asterisk liturgy of tending creased to softness. Say the names, Katie said, checking her list. And tell the truth, Brandon added, unconvincing snark over something like nerves. Even if the bees are the only ones listening. They listen well, Pastor Rosa said, appearing with the morning like she'd been poured out of it. She wore the same sun hat, a blue scarf at her neck, and a shirt with pears stitched down the placket, handmade or made to look that way. Mr. Pike's bringing a truck for brush. The D'Angelos texted. They're bringing a pie, people heard. Who told them? Brandon asked. Rosa shrugged. The trees, she said lightly, then looked at Carol, serious. You did by starting. They began with work, because truth sits better on clean ground. Brandon and Mr. Pike set to cutting back dead limbs along the lower rows. Katie labeled the last of the names she'd found in the shed asterisk Ortega asterisk Martin asterisk Yen asterisk *Piper***, sticking the tape strips just so, smoothing each with a small, satisfied swipe. Carol hauled brush with Rosa, their boots breathing dust, the ache in Carol's shoulders a good honest ache that didn't take, only gave back sleep later. By 10, cars started pulling onto the shoulder, door thunks, voices. The first arrivals were the Parkers, Mr. and Mrs., with a boy 2 years younger than Brandon who had the alert look of a kid who fixes bikes for fun. "We used to bring a step stool and pretend it was a throne," Mr. Parker said, patting a trunk. His eyes went bright. Mrs. Parker set a warm casserole on the table without fanfare. The Dangelos came next, pie steaming under foil, old music on their car radio. Mr. Dangelo hugged Rosa so hard she squeaked and then laughed. The Mendozas brought folding chairs and a Tupperware tower of empanadas that made Brandon do a subtle double take he thought no one saw. Rosa saw. Rosa always saw. "Gleaners welcome," Katie read from the shed sign, brushing dirt off the old letters. "I love that." "Means take some home," Rosa said. "Means the orchard is a table before it's a business." They gathered in the first row when the shade was right. Rosa lifted her chin, and the chatter settled like flour. "We're going to remember," she said. "And then we're going to tell the truth. If your truth is small, good, most truth is. If it's heavy, we'll hold it together." Carol took the notebook out and read the names. She'd practiced the cadence, steady, not church fancy like calling kids in from a game. "Dangelo, Parker, Singh, Mendoza, Rosa, don't let me cheat, Lee Wastler, Ortega, Martin, Yen, Piper." The words hung on the air, and then, to Carol's surprise, people answered back. "Here," Mrs. Parker said, hand on her husband's arm. "Still hungry," Mr. Dangelo said, smiling. "Grateful," said Mrs. Mendoza, and placed a small wrapped cookie on the wall for the birds. Brandon pumped water into a bucket. Katie poured at the base of a tired *** that had leafed late and half-hearted. The ground darkened. A child, Yen's little one, reached out and patted the wet dirt like it was a dog. "Now the truth," Rosa said softly. "Bread before it, bread after it." She tore a roll, passed the halves around, tore another, passed again. The truths were not dramatic. They were the kind that make a life. "My boy left last summer and I folded his t-shirts for weeks," Mrs. Parker said, voice wobbly, then steady. "But he calls on Sundays. I want to be glad for him without that tight thing in my chest." Mr. Dangelo touched the shadow of a scar on his wrist. "I drink too much when I feel lonely. Today I brought pie and not wine. I want to keep doing that." A teenager with chipped black nail polish, Piper, kicked at a dandelion and then said, fast, "I told my mom I hate this town and I don't. I'm just scared to be seen wanting things." Rosa nodded like each confession was a brick placed where it belonged. "Leave some," she said again, and they did. Crumbs on the low wall, an orange wedge, a slice of pie small as a promise. A honeyed quiet settled. Carol felt it as pressure behind her eyes. She meant to speak about nothing heavier than gratitude and a broken hoe mended with wire, but her mouth surprised her with the thing packing her ribs. "My anger," she said, the words small and exact. "I carry it around like a tool. I use it on the wrong things. I blame God for taking Lee, and then I get mad when God feels far." She waited for the burn of embarrassment. It didn't come. Bread before, bread after. She tore a piece and ate it. It tasted like flour and honey and not being alone. Brandon, eyes on the ground, said, "I keep thinking if I fix enough things, he'll walk through the door. That's stupid, and I know it. I just like the feeling of a bolt tightening, when the world doesn't." Katie, soft. "I draw people looking away because I'm afraid of drawing faces. I want to try to see them." Rosa touched the trunk with Lee's name. "He would have liked this," she said. "He always said truth makes the trees sweet." Laughter loosened shoulders. Mr. Pike cleared his throat. "Truth is I hate asking for help," he muttered, then pointed at the brush pile. "Which is unfortunate because that right there is going to require you all to prove me wrong." They set to work like telling the truth had greased the day. Brandon ran a fresh line from the pump to the far barrels. The hose fought him, then obeyed. He rigged a siphon that made Mr. Parker whistle. "College material," Parker said, and Brandon went red in the appreciative way that feels like a bench lifting off your back. Katie walked the rows with Yen's little girl, teaching her how to lay a palm flat on bark, how to spot tiny insect damage and what blister looks like on leaf. She drew faces now her own shyly. Piper, after asking, Rosa's, lined and glad. She taped one sketch to the shed door, people WHO 10 asterisk. Carol moved slower than the others, not because she had less to do, but because she was listening. For what, she couldn't have said. The orchard had a new sound today, like a room where a window had been cracked open. Bees stitched faster, or maybe truer. Leaves made that soft applause again. Only a little louder. The quiet SUV arrived just before noon. It rolled along the road, paused, and turned in this time. Lyle Carr stepped out in a weekend shirt and expensive boots that had never met real mud. "Neighbors," he said brightly. "Looks wonderful. Community days are my favorite days." Rosa's smile was polite in a way that could double as a shield. "Can we feed you, Mr. Carr?" "I never say no to breaking bread," he said, sliding into the circle with the ease of a man who learns rooms quickly. He bit an empanada, declared it perfect, shook hands, learned names with flattery's efficiency. "You must be Brandon," he said, clocking the hose rig. "You a senior?" "Yeah," Brandon said, bracing automatically. "Trades, college, both?" Lyle asked. "Working now, maybe a tech program when we can afford it." Brandon's chin lifted, a defiant twin to his honesty. "Well," Lyle said, eyes thoughtful, not missing the we. "The resort will need facilities leads, paid apprenticeships, scholarships too. We partner with the community college." He said the words softly, aimed like a dart. Carol felt it like a hand on Brandon's shoulder that didn't belong. She wiped her palms on her jeans, casual. "Resort?" she asked, keeping her voice curious, like a person being reasonable. "Small, tasteful," Lyle said smoothly, as if the question had been a prompt for his favorite monologue. "Wellness, yoga in the rows, farm-to-table dining. Will preserve the feel of the place and remove the burden." He gestured at the brush pile as if it were a moral failing. Mr. Pike snorted without humor. "Burden's another word for work I don't want to learn, where I'm from." "Progress is work done at scale," Lyle said pleasantly, as if quoting a pillow. He turned back to Brandon. "Why not get paid learning to run something this place will need anyway?" Brandon looked at the hose, at the barrels filling, at Carol. Hope lit his eyes, fast and guilty. He wanted, and wanting scared him. It scared Carol too, for different reasons. She pictured her boy in a shirt with a logo on the chest that wasn't his. She pictured gates closed with ribbon cuttings and good press. Rosa, mercifully ordinary, pressed a cup of water into Lyle's hand. "Drink," she said. "The liturgy says the thirsty first." Lyle accepted the cup, puzzled and amused. "Liturgy," he repeated, like a man reading a word off a menu of another language. Carol slid Mr. Alder's notebook onto the table and opened to the page. She didn't hand it to Lyle. She read not to him exactly, but into the day. "Stand in the row. Say the names of those who ate here. Offer water to the least likely tree. Break bread. Leave some. Tell the truth out loud." She looked up. "We're at truth." Lyle grinned. "My truth. I like beautiful things run beautifully." He raised his cup toward the orchard like a toast. "You'd be surprised what capital plus community can do." Rosa set a piece of roll on the wall. "And my truth," she said calmly, "is that some gates are opened by generosity and closed by efficiency. We want this gate open." A shadow crossed Lyle's expression, there and gone. He worked his jaw, let the grin return. "Then we'll open it together," he said, as if the word were an invitation only he could properly define. He placed his empty cup down, clean as a signature. "I'll draft a proposal. Friendly terms. The first pass is on my desk Monday." "Bring it to a table, not a desk," Rosa said. "Of course," Lyle said, already stepping away. He shook Brandon's hand, an extra squeeze implying secret understanding. "Think about that apprenticeship," he murmured. "You've got the hands. Don't waste them on scraps when you can build a ship." Brandon blinked. The compliment fit him too well. After the SUV left, conversation stuttered. then restarted like a record bumped and set back down. "Ship, my left boot," Mr. Pike muttered, sawing a limb clean. "He's building a dock to charge you rent to fish off your own river." "Language, Mr. Pike," Rosa said mildly. "Boot is church safe," he said. "Barely." Carol touched Brandon's elbow. "Hey," she said, quiet so it belonged to them. "We'll look at every opportunity with eyes open. You won't miss what's yours because you did right by something good." Brandon nodded once too fast. "I know," he said, voice tight with wanting to believe. They finished the watering circuit. Bees gathered thick at the clover patches near the shed, their hum deepening to a note Carol could feel in her sternum. When she tilted her head, the light itself seemed to warm, only by a breath, the smallest shift, like a bruise healing under skin. "Do you see that?" Katie asked, standing in the dapple by the **** row. On the bark, at a knot scar, a pale thread of green unfurled, new growth where there hadn't been yesterday. Rosa's eyes softened. "Truth does that," she said. They closed with thanks, no speech, just small words as they packed chairs and crumbed plates, asterisk for the water, for the pie, for strong backs, for being asked to help. Carol wiped the table slow, like a person winding down a song. She tucked the notebook away. At the car, Brandon hesitated. "I shouldn't have liked what he said," he blurted, "but I did." "You're allowed to like futures," Carol said. "We'll find one that doesn't cost us this." He nodded, jaw unclenching a notch. "I'll come early tomorrow. There's a low spot near the barrels. I want to set a stone base so the pump doesn't wobble." Katie slid into the backseat with her sketchbook and a pair she'd drawn 6 times, each more generous than the last. "I'm going to ask Piper if I can paint her. She said yes with her mouth earlier, but her shoulders said maybe. I want to wait until her shoulders say yes." Carol smiled, the ache in her ribs quieter than it had been in months. She looked back at the rose. Afternoon lay on the orchard like a blessing. "Thank you," she said under her breath, and the wind lifted the green ribbon at the gate in a little answer. As they drove away, a sparrow landed on the wall and took a tidy crumb, as if to say the liturgy continued whether they were there to see it or not. At home, after showers left the bathroom mirror fogged and soft, Carol sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper. She wrote to the man who drove that night at the top, then stared at the words until they steadied. She didn't write the rest. Not yet, but the title lived on the page like a seed in a dish. Outside, somewhere at the edge of town, the orchard breathed. The leaves remembered their names. The gate brightened by a shade you could measure only with hope. Chapter 4. The Deserter's Promise. Sunday came in clear and soft, the kind of morning that makes everything look newly washed. Brandon was out before breakfast, setting flat stones under the pump with a level and a patience that would have made Lee proud. Carol packed ham sandwiches, apples, and a small tin of oatmeal cookies she'd hidden from herself in the freezer. Katie slid fresh labels into her tote and tucked 3 small watercolor pans into her sketchbook's back pocket. Blue leaf honey. "Church?" Katie asked, one foot on the porch, one still in the kitchen. "We'll make the orchard our pew today," Carol said, not flippant, just honest about where her prayers were currently answering back. They reached Briar Hollow to find Mr. Pike already at work with a rake and a thermos that smelled like black coffee and stubbornness. "Morning," he called. "Your pump sits like a gentleman now," he told Brandon, approving the stone base with a grunt. "Won't wobble even if it dreams it did." Pastor Rosa arrived with an armful of seed packets, clover, buckwheat, wildflower. "For the between," she said, sprinkling with a sower's flick. "The spaces matter as much as the rows." They fell into the rhythms they were learning. Pump, carry, pour, clip, haul, stack, name, bless, leave some. Katie painted between tasks, a wedge of sunlight on a ladder, the shine on a bee's back, Brandon's bent head over the level. Carol moved slower, checking bark, touching leaves, weighing small decisions like they mattered because they did. By mid-morning, the orchard hummed with the kind of work that lifts a place. Then the SUV appeared again, as if it had been reading their schedule. Lyle Carr stepped out in rolled sleeves, sunglasses, and that grin that looked borrowed from a friendly commercial. He carried a sleek tablet under one arm. "Good to see momentum," he said, surveying the trimmed rows, the cleared brush. "May I show you something? 5 minutes. I promised myself I'd respect your time." Rosa looked at the tablet like it was a plate brought by a stranger at a potluck, smelled fine, might still be trouble. "5," she said, her tone cordial and watchful. She turned to Mr. Pike. "We'll keep the brush moving." Brandon wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped up beside Carol. Katie came too, sketchbook still in hand. Lyle tapped the tablet. A 3D model sprang to life, alder orchard, but clean-shaved. The weeds were gone. The rows were tidy and symmetrical, not the gentle imperfect of hands, but the precise pattern of code. Buildings grew in as if rising out of soil, low, glassy structures with wooden slats and tasteful stone. Words hovered above them, smooth and soothing. Retreat, wellness, gather, nourish. People, tiny figures, walked along paths with yoga mats and takeout cups that said Eden Cafe in a font that made Katie cringe. "Eco-friendly lodges," Lyle narrated. "A farm-to-table restaurant that keeps the orchard's story. Community classes, scholarships for local youth." He flicked and labels popped. Apprenticeships, facilities lead, operations trainee. He angled the tablet toward Brandon. "Paid training, good wages, a future that lifts you." Brandon didn't reach for it. He held his hands together as if afraid they might. His eyes flicked toward the model, toward the real trees, toward Carol. Hope and caution ran a race behind his face, and neither won. Lyle turned slightly, lowering his voice just enough that the words felt privately tailored. "Carol," he said, "I meant what I said about honoring the spirit here. I can write this a dozen ways that benefit you. A land lease that puts money in your pocket and leaves you in the story. Or a purchase that relieves you of liability but gives you lifetime access. I'm not a villain." The orchard seemed to breathe in and wait. Carol kept her eyes on the screen a moment longer than she wanted to. The buildings were beautiful in that careful way that erases the messy parts. A woman smiled up from a rendering, hair caught in imaginary sunlight, a pear in her hand that would never bruise. "It's very tidy," she said. "Tidy is merciful," Lyle said gently. He tapped again. The screen shifted to a view between 2 rows, the row with Lee's tag if Carol was oriented right. On the rendering, the tag was gone. The tree was just Bosque 14. "Grief," he said, using the word like a good doctor. "It grips, it keeps you in one season. Imagine, just imagine closing the door, not erasing the past, framing it, moving forward without the ache coming up like an unexpected step every morning." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the table. It was a small motion, but the screen picked it up. The model trembled, then steadied. The ache did what aches do when someone offers to take them away. It surged, greedy. How would building do that? Carol asked. It came out more honest than she'd intended. Lyle watched her like a person checking a flame. "Places carry," he said softly. "This one more than most. You've felt it. Old promises and old wounds hang in the air here like fog on low ground. Seal the place carefully, respectfully, and the fog lifts. People heal faster when they aren't breathing yesterday." Seal the place. The words slid over her skin like cold water. Katie's head snapped up. She had been drawing the tiny figures on the tablet, reducing them to silhouettes with her pencil. "Seal," she repeated, not loud, every letter clear. "Like close." "A boundary," Lyle said quickly, friendly again. "Think of it as stewardship at scale. You keep what's good, we mitigate what tangles." He glanced toward the rows. "This orchard is a threshold. Thresholds need management. If you don't, somebody will." "Somebody like you," Mr. Pike said flatly, arriving with Rosa, both of them scenting smoke the way fire folk do. Lyle didn't flinch. He faced the 2 elders with respect calibrated to almost convincing. "Somebody like me, only less interested in being liked," he said. "If I don't, someone with worse taste will. I'm offering to keep this from becoming a parking lot for a big box store." "False choices make nice cages," Rosa said mildly. The tablet glowed between them. In the real orchard, a breeze lifted a few leaves. Carol wondered, no, she felt, the light dim half a tone, not shade exactly, but something like sorrow remembering its lines. It could have been nothing. It could have been everything. Lyle saw her see it. For a flash, a thin, honest instant, his pleasant face emptied of performance and showed weariness, and something darker under it, resolve honed against regret. "Let me show you one more thing," he said, and without waiting, he turned and walked the path toward the row with Lee's tag, the real one. He stopped beneath that familiar limb as if he'd stood there before. Carol followed because her feet moved. Brandon and Katie came because they would not leave her to a conversation that felt too much like being led to a polished edge. Lyle touched the rough bark like a man greeting an old colleague, not unkind, familiar. He pressed his palm flat and something in the air thrummed, a small vibration Carol felt in her teeth. "You know, don't you?" Katie whispered to Carol, eyes wide. "He knows the trees." Lyle spoke without turning. "I used to tend places like this," he said, and the words hit the air heavy with a confession he had carefully dressed as a resume line. "I learned what gates want, what they give, what they cost. I learned how to quiet them when they sing people into foolishness." Rosa's voice was steady. "We call that singing people into hope." "Hope is a kind of pain manager," Lyle said, almost kindly. "I prefer cures." He faced Carol fully now, no grin, only a tired man's intensity who has decided to be believed. "You could be free of the bruise," he said, the words striking bone because of what had happened with the pair. "You could stop waking at 3 a.m. to count what you can't carry. All it takes is closing the gate. I know how. I can do it in a way that leaves a nice story and jobs and a plaque with Lee's name. You'll be the woman who brought healing to Briar Hollow." Brandon's jaw tightened. "Closing for who?" he asked. "Us or you?" "For everyone," Lyle said. "No more tug, no more strange fruit in May, no more openings that invite the wrong sort." "The wrong sort," Rosa's eyebrows lifted. "Desperate people," Lyle said softly, not sorry enough. "Grief makes people take. Gates make people hungry. I'm tired of watching hunger turn kind folks cruel." Carol thought of Mr. Alder's notebook. Share with the hungry before weighing your own basket. She thought of how the trees had lifted their leaves at the first drink. She looked at the tag with Lee's name. It swung a little, catching the light. She also thought of her bed at 3 a.m. like he'd said. Of the notch in the mattress where she still didn't let herself roll. "Mom," Brandon said, because he could read the way a mother tilts in a decision. "I'm listening," Carol said because she was. That was all the opening the day needed. The light thinned, almost imperceptible, as if a cloud had crossed the sun miles away. A bee bumped her cheek and corrected course, unsettled. On the bark near Lyle's hand, a hairline crack spidered outward a fraction, the smallest harm you could measure and still have it be harm. Katie sucked in a breath. "Don't," she said, and took Carol's hand, sticky with sap, fingers tight. Rosa stepped forward so that the four of them made a small shield around the tagged tree. She placed her palm against the bark. "We name what we are tempted by," she said calmly, like an usher with a steady light in a dark theater. "We say it out loud so it can't dress up as wisdom and drive the car." "I want easy," Carol said, honest dropping like a coin into water. "I want sleep. I want my children to have a straight road." "I want money," Brandon said, as if he were spitting a bad taste. "I want to not watch you count grocery coupons. I want to take apart a machine and get paid to put it back together." "I want to be brave without being asked to be brave," Katie said. "I want to paint faces that will stay." They stood like that, wanting within arm's reach of the tree. Mr. Pike cleared his throat. "And I want my coffee to pour itself," he said from behind them, voice gentle and gravelly, breaking the spell with humor the way a man tosses a stone to change a river's line. "Don't mean I should sell the creek." Lyle looked at each of them as if weighing the last argument he could make without showing a hand he didn't want to show. Then the pleasant version of his face stepped back in. He slid the tablet under his arm, the rendering shutting down with a clean glow. "Think on it," he said, cheerful again, as if nothing sacred had just brushed past. "I'll bring numbers tomorrow. A pen can be a plow when it's held right." Rosa smiled, a small, invincible thing. "Bring bread," she said. "We'll weigh both." He left. The SUV crunched away. The orchard exhaled, not relief exactly, more like a place remembering itself after a mask is removed from the room. Brandon let out a breath he'd been holding. "I almost said yes," he admitted, voice low, ashamed and not. "Me too," Carol said. "Me too," Katie echoed. Rosa's eyes were kind and sharp at once. "Temptation is a compliment," she said. "It means the good is near enough to counterfeit." They spent the next hour doing small, mending things like people who have decided to move slowly until their hearts catch up. Brandon tightened bolts on the rain barrel stands. Katie retied tags and penciled today. Light dimmed. We stayed on the back of her sketch. Carol watered the least likely trees until their leaves made that tiny lift again. Rosa sowed more clover. Mr. Pike told a story about a storm in '94 when a limb fell and crushed his mailbox, and how his mailman left letters on a shovel upright in the yard like a flag. They laughed, the light in the orchard warming by a breath. The shiver faded. Before they left, Carol took out the sheet of paper she'd titled to the man who drove that night. She had brought it to the orchard without knowing why. She stood by the low wall, set the page on the stone, and wrote, "I have hated you like a job. I am tired of working for hate." The rest would come later, or not. She folded the page and slid it back into her pocket like a seed that needed another day. On the way to the car, Katie paused at the gate. "Mom." "Yes." "If we say yes to help, can we make sure it's the kind that makes the gate brighter, not quieter?" "That's the only yes we'll give," Carol said. They drove home through late light that cut long shadows in the fields. Brandon's hands were stained with honest grease. Katie's fingers glowed with leaf and honey paint. Carol's pocket held a folded paper that felt heavier than it was, and somehow lighter. Behind them in the orchard, the tag with Lee's name swung once and stilled, catching the last gold of day. The crack on the bark was real and very small. The tree would heal. The bees returned to the hive like a chorus finishing a song together. And the gate, if anyone had been there at dusk with a heart quiet enough to notice, brightened by the width of a breath that chooses patience. Chapter 5, The Long Night and the Little Light. The sky turned that strange green that means the weather is changing its mind. All afternoon the air had felt heavy, as if the town were ajar with the lid screwed on too tight. The forecast said scattered thunderstorms in the calm voice of people who live under ceilings. Out at the orchard, the leaves had been restless, flashing their pale undersides as if asking questions. By evening, Carol had the old box fan set in the kitchen window and a pot of soup on low. Brandon had come home with bark dust in his hair and pinched his shoulder like he'd fought a stubborn branch and won. Katie rinsed pears from the grocer, because the ones from the orchard still belonged to later. She arranged the store fruit in a bowl and then, without thinking, set Mr. Alder's pear seeds in their saucer next to them like little cousins visiting. "Storm," Brandon announced, peering past the curtain as lightning stitched the horizon. "I'm going to check the maple out front. The big limb looks so twitchy." "Be quick," Carol said and reached for her phone to text Pastor Rosa, "Weather looks mean." "You okay?" Rosa sent back a picture of her own kitchen table, candles, a Bible, a loaf of bread under a towel. "Okay," she wrote. "If the lights go, we'll call them bells and keep praying." The first rain hit wide and hard, big drops that sounded like someone tapping coins on the roof. Then the wind arrived. A shove shouldered through the neighborhood, shaking shutters, rattling mailboxes. The maple out front bowed like a dancer who'd practiced curtsies, then jerked back as if surprised. Brandon was already on the porch, one hand on the column, eyes up. "That limb's not good," he said, and Carol saw it too, a long, half-dead arm pointing at their roof like a problem that had finally said its name. "Come in," Carol called. "We can't do anything now." "Let me just..." He took 2 quick steps into the yard, scanning the angle, the split. Rain soaked his t-shirt in a sentence. Lightning flashed again, nearer. Thunder followed, a rolled command. He came back, shaking water out of his eyes. "Yeah, if that goes, it's the roof or the front window." The power clicked off as if it had been listening. The fan fell silent. The soup simmered one more defiant bubble and stopped. The house became a black shape with breathing inside it. I'll get the candles, Katie said, already moving. She knew which drawer. The box slid, matches flared, wicks caught. Small bells, like Rosa had said, the kind that sound like a yes. The storm shouldered harder. Rain drove against the glass. The maple bowed and bowed until the long limb cracked with a sound like a dull gunshot. Down! Brandon grabbed Katie's arm without ceremony and pulled, tucking her into the corner by the stairs as the limb fell, slow and terrible. It hit the porch roof first, tore shingles like paper, slid, and slammed against the front window with a heavy, relieved thud. The glass held. The whole house flinched. I'm okay, Katie said, breath rushing out of her. They both laughed, the odd, shaky laugh that comes when the world doesn't break where you thought it would. Carol's heart hammered in her throat. Inside, she said, though they already were. Away from the window. She checked them with her hands as if feeling were a kind of seeing. Brandon's shoulder was hot under her palm, and he winced. Just a pull, he said. I'll ice it. He grinned sideways at Katie. You okay? Yeah, she said, still tucked, still small. You pulled me like a sack of flour. You're lighter than a sack of flour. I'm not arguing. They set up camp in the kitchen because kitchens are where people survive weather. Candles on the table. Soup bowls like small moons. The storm moved on the house, trying doors, shaking hinges. The limbs on the maple scuffed the roof and then fell into a rhythm that wasn't hostile anymore, just busy. A text blinked in on Carol's phone from an unknown number. This is Mr. Pike. Rosa gave me your contact. Big limb down at my place, too. You okay? We're fine, Carol typed with wet thumbs. Roof scuffed, window held. You. Mailbox dead again. 1994 flashbacks. Coffee survived. A beat. Trees will need checking at first light. Not tonight. The lights did not come back. Time slowed to the speed of a candle flame. In that quiet, the ache at 3 a.m. knocked early, interrupting the storm's monologue. Carol didn't want it. She also didn't want to pretend it wasn't there. She pulled the folded paper from her pocket, to the man who drove that night, and set it on the table by the candle. The flame made the fibers glow. Brandon and Katie watched her with the careful eyes of kids who know a parent is doing something hard. I think I need to write, Carol said, not apologizing. You don't have to listen. We're here, Brandon said, if you want us to be. I do. She smoothed the paper and picked up a pen. The storm backed off a step, as if giving them room. She wrote, You didn't wake up that morning and plan to take a life. I have said you did, because it let me aim my pain. The pen paused. You were careless and it mattered. You hurt us and that matters. But I don't want to hold your throat in my fist forever. I am tired. I want to open my hand. Brandon shifted, the chair creaking. Katie's candle pooled wax like a small lake. I won't pretend this letter changes you. It might not even find you. Maybe it only changes me. If that is all, it is still not small. I don't forgive the wreck. I forgive the man. I won't be your jailer anymore. She set the pen down. Her chest felt raw and strangely clean, like air after lightning. Mom, Katie whispered, reverent as if a bird had landed on the table. Brandon swallowed. Do you want me to mail it? Not yet, Carol said, but soon. A gust hit the house from a new angle. Somewhere outside, another branch let go. The storm wasn't done. The candles leaned and corrected themselves. Brandon stood to stretch his shoulder and hissed, hand going to the muscle. Okay, that's more than a pull, he admitted. Sit, Carol said, already going to the fridge out of habit before remembering it was dark and quiet. Ice is melted. She scanned the counter. The pears, the seeds, the knife in the block. Her hand hovered over the fruit bowl and stopped. The store pears were perfect and useless. We need something cold, Katie said, opening and closing drawers as if chill might be hiding in utensils. Her eyes fell on the small saucer of seeds. Or. She looked at Carol, question tender in her face. Is it foolish to ask? We could try, she said. Like the first night, with the pear. Carol had not wanted to ask for anything tonight. She felt emptied already, the letter like a second storm passed through. But her son's face was tight. and the house smelled like wet leaves and courage. She reached for the knife. "We don't have a pear from the orchard," she said, telling the truth of the pantry. "But we have these." She picked up the tiny brown seeds with her fingertips, held them in her palm like a handful of punctuation. She didn't know what the liturgy required for small things like this. She only knew the shape of please. Carol set the seeds on a folded dish towel and placed her hand over them the way you shelter a match. She closed her eyes and felt ridiculous and exactly right. "Please," she said simply, because eloquence is soft against injury. Heat gathered under her palm, not dramatic, a domestic warmth like a cup between hands. She lifted her hand. The seeds were the same, but the air in the kitchen changed, tilted 1 degree toward summer. A smell rose, not pears, not exactly, more the smell you get when you stand in the orchard between rain and sun and the leaves decide to trust the day again. She turned to Brandon. "Give me your hand." He did, and she pressed her warm palm over the sore muscle, not as a healer on TV, but as a mother who has always laid hands on fevers and scraped knees and nightmares. The heat moved from her hand into his shoulder like a quiet yes. His breath left him in a grateful rush. "Oh," he said, honest as a small boy. "Oh, that's okay, that's better." He flexed. The sharp edge of pain had rounded. Not gone, but kinder. He laughed, a little embarrassed at the relief. "Thanks." "We still ice it when the power's back," Carol said, practical, returning like a faithful dog. The candles burned lower. The storm walked down the street, shouting less, complaining more softly to other porches. In the lull, with the house listening, the three of them stood at the window and looked at the fallen limbs sprawled across the porch roof like a dragon that had changed its mind about being fearsome. "We'll cut it up tomorrow," Brandon said. "I'll borrow Mr. Pike's show-off saw." "We'll bring the pieces to the orchard," Katie said. "Stack them for a bench." Carol imagined that, sitting on a bench made from tonight's trouble, eating bread in the shade of the trees Lee had watered. The thought settled in her like good soup. The lights blinked and came back with a small cheer from the refrigerator. The fan in the window started, then sputtered, then remembered itself. The house sighed in relief, the way bodies do when tension leaves, embarrassed it ever arrived. They blew out the candles one by one. Each left a thread of smoke that wrote secret cursive on the air and then vanished. Carol folded the letter and slid it into the drawer by the stove, top corner just visible, like a promise you plan to keep. Before bed, they stood in the doorway and looked at the maple. Rain ticked off its leaves. The broken limb was ugly and honest. The porch roof would need patching. The window had earned praise. "Good job," Carol told the glass, and they all smiled like people who had been spared and knew it. In the quiet after they turned out the lights, Carol lay awake because her body doesn't unlearn habits in one night. But when the 3 a.m. ache came to clock in, it found the letter in the drawer like a closed door where it expected a hallway. It paused, listening to the new shape of the house. Across town, the orchard took on the storm with patience. A limb fell there, too, one of the truly dead ones that Mr. Pike had meant to cut. It landed in the row like a sentence finally put in the right place. The hive held. The rain barrels filled. In the second row, on the knot where a crack had spidered yesterday, a glossy bead of sap gathered and sealed the wound with the stubborn intelligence of trees. At dawn, when the light came thin and silver, Carol woke to a feeling that wasn't peace yet, but was definitely not fear. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. The house creaked in the particular way that means we made it. In the kitchen, she opened the drawer and took out the letter. She added a line. "Tomorrow I will bring this to Pastor Rosa and ask her to read it while I listen to how it sounds outside my head." She signed her name. She did not add apologies or explanations. She folded the paper again, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote to be delivered when ready on the front. Brandon came in with the morning in his hair and rotated his shoulder experimentally. "Better," he said, surprised again but less surprised than last time. "Let's go cut a dragon." Katie followed, still in pajama pants under a rain jacket, tucking her brush into her braid like a pencil. "Let's turn it into a bench." They ate toasted rolls with honey, because honey is how you tell a day you believe in it. Then they packed the saw and gloves, loaded the thermos, and stepped onto the porch. "Thank you," Carol told the tree, the storm, the house, the letter, the seeds, without ranking which deserved it most. They drove toward Briar Hollow under a sky washed clean, the kind of blue that looks like a new page. Somewhere behind them on their street, a mailbox leaned at a jaunty angle that would make Mr. Pike roll his eyes and laugh. Somewhere ahead, the orchard waited with wet leaves and full barrels, and a gate brightened by a breath of forgiveness. It would be a day for mending. Those are good days. Chapter 6. What we name, we mend. Morning wore last night's rain like a clean shirt. The street glittered in places where puddles had settled and decided to stay a while. The maple out front dripped politely. On the porch, the fallen limb lay like a dragon after a good scolding, ugly, heavy, not scary anymore. Brandon tested his shoulder and nodded. "Let's cut it careful," he said. "We want pieces we can lift." Carol handed him gloves and the small bow saw. "No heroics, straight cuts. We keep all the fingers God issued." Katie set a tarp under the worst of the mess so the shingles wouldn't collect splinters. She had braided her hair with a thin green ribbon she'd found on the orchard gate, washed and smoothed. It looked on her like a quiet yes. They worked with the simple pleasure of tasks you can finish. Brandon cut. Carol levered. Katie stacked the rounds in a tidy pyramid that promised a future bench. A neighbor paused on the sidewalk, gave a thumbs up and said, "It missed the window. Mercy." "Mercy," Carol agreed and met the word with her hands. By 9, they had a trunk of logs and a roof of honest scars. They swept the porch into order, washed the porch rail with a rag that turned gray and then gave up, and loaded the car with tools, tarp, thermos, and the letter in its envelope. Carol tucked the letter into her bag as if it were as necessary as the wrench. "Bench first," Brandon said, already planning angles in his head. "Then the low branches on the second row." "And I need to talk to Pastor Rosa," Carol said, "if she's at the orchard." "She's always at the orchard, even when she's in her kitchen," Katie said, smiling. "She carries it in her pockets like mints." Briar Hollow had the look of a place that weathered something and kept its manners. Tree limbs were down here and there, but not in a way that made a map of trouble. At the gate, the green ribbon lifted and settled like breathing. The lock turned with a sound that felt less like metal and more like a greeting. The orchard smelled bright, wet leaf, damp earth, the clean penny scent of yesterday's pump water drying on wood. The hive under the shed eaves was busy like Sunday pie hour. Bees came and went in straight lines, small pilots flying known routes. Mr. Pike stood near the second row with a rake, hat tilted back. He raised the rake in salute. "Broke what needed breaking," he said, nodding toward a dead limb that lay on the grass like a sentence finally put right. "Saved what could be saved." Pastor Rosa came up the lane with her old canvas bag and a tin of something that steamed. "Biscuits," she announced. "Drop style, butter in the jar. Thank the storm for the cooler air, my oven finally cooperated." Carol hugged her without warning. Rosa blinked at the suddenness and then returned the squeeze with both arms and a small pat. "Mende," she said cheerfully into Carol's shoulder. "The best kind." "I brought the letter," Carol said, stepping back. The envelope felt heavier than paper in her hand. "If you can read it while I listen, not to fix it, just so it becomes real outside my head." "Gladly," Rosa said. She took the envelope the way you take a newborn, competent, careful, expecting goodness and ready for tears. They set the limb rounds by the low wall and tested heights. Brandon rolled 2 together and sat. "Solid," he said, satisfied. "We can add a back later. For now, it's a place to breathe." "Name it," Katie said, pencil already out. "We'll forget if we don't label." Brandon pretended to think hard. "Storm bench," he offered. "Too obvious," Katie said. "Dragon seat." "Better," Mr. Pike said. "Has drama." Katie printed dragon seat, first try on a strip of masking tape, and stuck it to the end grain. The words looked right there, like a story that intended to continue. They ate biscuits hot enough to make fingers dance and moved into the liturgy because men days like order. Carol pulled Mr. Alder's notebook from her bag and opened to the page that had already softened to a familiar bend. Liturgy of Tending. "Names first," she said. They said them: D'Angelo, Parker, Singh, Mendoza, Rosa. Don't let me cheat. Lee Wastler, Ortega, Martin, Yen, Piper. Each name went up like a prayer that didn't need church walls to be heard. "Least likely tree," Katie prompted. Carol scanned the row and found a small comus with a thin canopy, leaves that did not yet trust the day. "There," she said. Brandon pumped. Water sloshed into the bucket. Katie poured slowly, drawing the circle wider with each pass. The soil darkened, drank. On the second pour, the leaves lifted a heartbeat, and on the third, they did it again, taller, like someone who's decided to try standing all the way up. "Truth," Rosa said softly. She unfolded Carol's letter. They stood in the row, the four of them, as if the trees were listening with their whole attention. Rosa read. She did not add commentary. She did not pause to bless. She let the words do their work. When she got to, "I don't want to hold your throat in my fist forever," Brandon bowed his head as if he'd heard a bell. Katie slid her hand into Carol. Mr. Pike leaned his rake against a tree and looked at the ground with the manners of a man who knows when to give someone privacy in public. Rosa finished. She folded the letter once, twice, with the neat respect of a person closing a book that mattered. The orchard had gone very quiet. Even the bees' hum sounded lower, as if they'd dimmed the room for the important part. "Will you mail it?" Carol asked, her voice steady only because speaking steady had become a practice. "When you say," Rosa said. "I'll walk it to the post box like it's money." "Not today," Carol said. "Tomorrow, I want to sit with it while we mend." "Good," Rosa said. She put the letter back into the envelope and slid it into her canvas bag. Mending likes company. The day unfolded into small, faithful tasks. Brandon checked the rain barrel stands, wedged a flat stone under one that wobbled, and tightened each nut with a satisfying finality. Mr. Pike and he trimmed hangers from last night's tantrum, each cut neat and blessed because Carol said the words and meant them. "Bless," she murmured, hand on the saw handle, words simple as breath. It felt less like superstition and more like telling the universe, "We intend good by this cut." Katie retied tags with fresh twine and added little drawings beside the names. Mrs. Mendoza's empanada, triangle and steam squiggles. Mr. Parker's step stool, square and crown. Lee, a ladder and a music note, crooked and true. She painted a thin wash of honey on the dragon seat end grain. The wood drank it like thirsty skin. Around noon, people came the way water finds a riverbed it remembers. Piper arrived with a shy wave and a pan of brownies balanced like a cargo ship. The Yens came with their little one and a stack of paper cups. The D'Angelos, of course. With a second pie and applause for the bench. "Looks like a council spot," Mr. D'Angelo declared, and sat as if elected. "We're doing the liturgy on repeat today," Rosa told the newcomers. "Sit, speak, eat, work, that order or another, it all counts." Truth came gentle again, and something in the orchard heard it. The hive's hum deepened to a key lower, richer. The leaves in the second row shivered like a congregation standing. Once, when Brandon carried a bucket past the Anjou trees, a breeze went through with such sudden sweetness that he stopped and laughed. No joke, just the relief of a body hearing a note it needed. In the middle of this, Lyle appeared, as promises often do, wearing understatement like a suit. He didn't bring the tablet. He carried a folder, paper, which was either strategy or concession. His smile was small and appropriately humble, calibrated for a men day. "Proposals," he said, holding the folder as if it might, if treated carefully, turn into something everyone wanted. Rosa gestured to the dragon seat. "Sit," she said. "We're reading letters aloud today." Carol didn't flinch. "Not yet," she said, "but we're weighing words." Lyle sat. He watched the work without comment for a minute and almost looked like a neighbor. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentler than yesterday's pitch. "You've done good here," he said to Brandon, nodding at the barrel fix. "Solid." "Thanks," Brandon said. nervous and pleased because the praise was true even if the lips that said it were complicated. Lyle set the folder on his knees and didn't open it. "Tell me about the liturgy," he said to Rosa, surprising them by not leading with numbers. Rosa told him. She didn't sell it. She described it like a recipe passed down. Stand in the row, say the names, water the least likely tree, break bread, leave some, tell the truth out loud. "The gate brightens where truth is spoken and where the poor are remembered," she finished, not as a threat, not as a riddle, just as the kind of sentence a place will prove or not by what happens next. Lyle's expression did a small, honest thing. It softened with grief. "Gates can also break hearts," he said. "I've watched them grab people by the longing and drag them into trying to save what can't be saved." "Saving is above our pay grade," Rosa said. "Mending is not." Something in that undoing of job titles made Lyle look away. He opened the folder as if to hide from the sentence inside it. Paper flickered. Numbers waited for their cue. Before he could begin, Katie made a small sound, half breath, half word. She stood very still, her face turned toward the far end of the second row where the shade pooled deeper. "Do you see that?" she asked, careful, not loud, as if sound might scare it. Carol followed her gaze. At first she saw only the dapple of leaves and the ordinary shadow work of a late morning. Then her eyes found it, a shimmer at knee height where the air looked thicker, like heat over a road, but cooler, silver, like the surface of water at night. It wasn't big. The width of a doorway if a doorway were uncertain about committing to being a doorway. "Hold," Rosa said very softly, the way a rider tells a horse. "No rush." The bees changed their pattern, making a wider circle around the shimmer without panic. The hum in Carol's chest matched the hive. She felt her heart step forward one pace. Katie took 2 small steps toward it because she is the one who draws faces and wants them to stay. She knelt, hands on her thighs, and tilted her head as if the air had spoken. "It looks hurt," she said, "like a bruise under skin." She turned to Carol. "Can I?" "Yes," Carol said, already kneeling beside her. They were 2 women on a kitchen floor, leaning close to a child's scraped knee. She set her palm out, not touching the silver, just letting the warmth of her hand be known. "Least likely," she whispered, remembering the liturgy. "Truth." She drew breath like a seamstress threading a needle. "I wanted easy yesterday. I wanted to close you to stop my hurt." Saying it out loud felt like picking up a stone and setting it down where it belonged. The shimmer brightened by a hair, not a trick of sun, a change that stayed changed. Brandon knelt on the other side, the ground damp through his jeans. He placed his hand near Carol. "I want money because I'm tired of watching us scrape," he said, voice steady and ashamed and proud of being honest all at once. "I'll work for it without selling what isn't mine to sell." Another breath of brightness. Bees turned once in a tight, delighted loop. Rosa laid 2 fingers on the grass. "I want my people to be safe," she said. "I want to keep wolves out without building walls that keep wanderers from finding home." The silver thinned at the center the way ice thins in spring. Mr. Pike didn't kneel. His knees told him no. He leaned on his rake like a staff. "I want to be useful until the last day," he said simply. "I'll share my saw." Katie looked at Lyle. She didn't glare. She asked with her eyes. Lyle stared at the brightening like a man recognizing an old road he swore he'd never walk again. His jaw worked. For a second, his careful face let grief stand unbuttoned. "I want to stop watching people hurt," he said, not quite to them, not quite to himself, the words low enough that someone could mistake them for thought. "I want to control what can't be controlled." He closed his eyes for the length of a breath. When he opened them, the professional returned, but not completely. "And I don't know how to want less." The shimmer widened like a sigh that forgives the person who made it necessary. On the other side, only visible when the light pooled just right, Carol glimpsed something that felt both ruined and waiting. A low wall of stone covered in vines that wanted a hand, a path scuffed by feet that had stopped coming, a tree stump with a green ring of new shoots stubborn as hope. Not a postcard, not a lie. A garden that had been hurt and wanted fiercely to heal. Katie's breath caught. "Do you see it?" she whispered. "I see enough," Carol said. She did not reach through. She did not test the silver. She did what she knew. She set a piece of biscuit on the grass by the brightness and said, "For the hungry." The bees approved. Rosa closed her eyes. "The gate brightens where truth is spoken and where the poor are remembered," she said again, not as an incantation, but as a line in a book you live your way into. They sat back on their heels and let the air settle. The shimmer stayed. It did not grow into spectacle. It did not fade into denial. It stayed, which, as Carol was learning, was one of the holiest things. Lyle stared at the place where ordinary had thinned. He swallowed. He put the folder on the dragon seat and set his hand on it like a man holding a leash that might slip. "I'll bring bread tomorrow," he said. Voice roughened by too many strategies meeting a plain thing. "And the numbers, but bread first." "Good," Rosa said, as if they'd agreed on the shape of the world. Work resumed around the brightness, the way life resumes around a baby sleeping in the middle of a living room. People moved more carefully, voices a little lower. Brandon built the first section of the bench back, his shoulder holding without complaint. Katie sketched the shimmer not as a special effect, but as a faint silver veil drawn with a wet brush. Carol watered the least lovely trees until their leaves learned the day. When it was time to go, Carol walked to the dragon seat and sat. She looked at the letter peeking from Rosa's bag, then at the shimmer, then at the tag with Lee's name. All three tugged in different directions and somehow braided into one rope she could hold. "Tomorrow," she told Rosa, "we'll mail it." "I'll wear my walking shoes," Rosa said. They closed the gate gently. The click of the lock sounded like the period at the end of a sentence that knows another sentence is coming. In the car, Brandon drove with the steady hands of someone who had held heat in his shoulder and watched it ease. Katie fell asleep before the turn onto their street, mouth open, ribbons slipping. Carol let herself look in the rearview at the orchard one more time. The shimmer wasn't visible from the road. That felt right. Gates don't perform, they invite. At home, they unloaded the wood rounds left for tomorrow's second bench leg. Carol set her bag on the table and rested her palm on it where the letter lay. The house felt different, not fixed, not finished, mended. Mending, she corrected herself, present tense. She put the kettle on, honey on the counter, 3 mugs. "Thank you," she said into the kitchen, to the day, to the people who had told small, brave truths, to the bruise that had begun to vanish on the bark and in her chest. Across town, the orchard breathed. The bees tucked in, bellies full of clean work. The sap bead on the seckle not hardened to a clear seal. And the gate, no larger than a door and no louder than a held breath, stayed, bright enough that a bird paused mid-flight and seemed to consider it before choosing its usual branch. Tomorrow they would mail a letter. Tomorrow Lyle would bring bread. Tomorrow was enough. Chapter 7. Bread on the table, letter on the air. Morning opened its hands and let them in. Carol tucked the envelope into her bag like a heart with a stamp. She didn't rush. She put on Lee's old denim shirt over her t-shirt because the pockets were deep and the wear felt honest. Brandon loaded the second stack of porch dragon rounds in the trunk for the bench back. Katie slid a fresh page into her sketchbook and tucked the green ribbon back into her braid. "We'll go to the orchard first," Carol said, "then the post box." "And you'll read it?" Katie asked, soft as steam. "I will," Carol said. Her voice was steady enough to trust. Briar Hollow met them with leaf light and the sound of yesterday's rain drying out of everything. The lock turned like a remembered song. Bees made their short, purposeful lines. Mr. Pike had been early, a small pile of brush already waited by the ditch like a polite guest. Pastor Rosa came up the lane with her canvas bag and a loaf wrapped in a towel, still warm. "Bread first," she said, grinning at her own sermon from yesterday. "Letter first," Carol answered, and the grin softened into something like pride. They carried the loaf to the dragon seat and set the towel back. Steam rose like a blessing that had learned manners. Rosa poured water into cups. Brandon set the new rounds where they would best take weight. Katie taped a fresh label under dragon seat first try, back second try. "Before we do anything," Carol said, "I need to put this in the air." She took the letter from her bag and did not hand it away. She held it, unfolded it, smoothed the creases with the side of her thumb. She didn't stand like a witness at a microphone. She sat on the bench they'd made from last night's trouble, feet flat, hands trembling only a little. Brandon took Katie's hand on one side. Rosa and Mr. Pike stood near, quiet as trees. Carol read. To the man who drove that night. You didn't wake up and plan to take a life. I said you did, because it gave my pain a target. You were careless and it mattered. You hurt us and that matters. But I am tired of holding your throat in my fist. I want to open my hand. I don't forgive the wreck. I forgive the man. You may never read this. Maybe this changes only me. That would still not be small. I have hated you like a job. I resign. I will still cry on strange Tuesdays. I will still talk to an empty chair sometimes. But I will stop building a house for anger to live in. I will live here instead, where truth stands in rows and we water the least likely tree. If you ever come hungry, there will be bread. Carol Wastler. She lowered the paper. The orchard listened the way good friends do, without questions, without advice, carrying the weight alongside you so the ground feels closer. Brandon let out a breath he'd been holding for months. That's the best thing I ever heard, he said, rough around the edges. Katie's cheeks were wet, and she didn't hide it. Mr. Pike stared down at his boots the way a man looks at the earth when he's trying not to embarrass it with tears. Rosa held out the towel-covered loaf. Bread before, bread after, she said, and they broke it and they ate. When the butter jar made its way back to Carol, she set it down and stood. One more place, she said. She crossed to the second row where the silver shimmer still held. No bigger, no smaller, just faithfully there like a promise that doesn't need attention to remain true. She knelt. She laid the letter on the grass beside the brightness, not inside it. She read the last line again, directly to the air that felt thin and full. If you ever come hungry, there will be bread. The shimmer brightened, not spectacle, just one more degree toward daylight. The bees turned once like dancers who knew their cue. Now we can mail it, Carol said. They didn't go straight to town. Work likes witnesses, too. Brandon bolted the bench back in place, the wrench singing that small metal song he loved. Katie made a quick, joyous sketch. Letter plus loaf plus light, her notes said along the margin. Rosa scribbled a name list for the week's gleaning, who'd bring chairs, who had extra jars. Mr. Pike trimmed a mean-looking stub and said bless with his hands. Only then did they wipe their palms and drive down into town, the letter tucked against Carol's pulse. The post box on the corner outside the small brick post office had a habit of sticking when it didn't like the weather. Today it opened like it had heard the story and wanted to cooperate. Carol slid the envelope in. It hit the metal floor with the soft, real sound of a thing leaving your hand and becoming the world. There, she said. Good, Rosa said. Now, bread for the orchard table, and I suspect numbers for the dragon seat. They were right. When they returned, the SUV was already there, as if it could smell decisions. Lyle stood by the bench with a brown paper bag and no folder visible. He wore a simple shirt and sunglasses tucked in the placket. He looked like a neighbor. He looked like a man not sure how to be one. I brought bread, he said, and lifted the bag as if hoping it might count for more than it weighed. Rosa took it, peered in, and smiled at a round country loaf marked by a careful cross. Well baked, she said. Come sit. He sat. He glanced toward the second row, eyes flinching a fraction at the steady silver, then back to the people at the table. Numbers, too, he said quietly, tapping a thin folder now revealed from under the bench. But bread first. They ate. It wasn't a performance. It was mouthfuls and napkins and Brandon's quiet, "This is good," and Katie's satisfied hum. Lyle tore his piece and ate as if he were surprised to be allowed the ordinary grace of it. After, he opened the folder. He didn't spread splashy renderings. He laid out paper with columns and words like lease option, community trust, operating agreement, right of way. He spoke less like a salesman and more like a translator trying to make two languages meet. Here, what I can write, he said. A land lease to a trust you form, neighbors, church, whoever you name. My company builds only along the edge here. He pointed to the map margin away from the rows, no lodging in the orchard proper. Your trust holds veto power on events. The gate, what you call the gate, his mouth shaped the word carefully, is off limits, permanently preserved. 10 apprenticeships a year written into the agreement. Scholarships indexed to revenue. A clause that shuts the whole thing down if the terms are broken. He looked up. It's not nothing, he said. It's control where you need it and money where you want it. It keeps wolves out. And lets shepherds sleep, Mr. Pike asked. Lyle's mouth twitched. I don't know how to do that for anyone, he said, and the honesty knocked a pebble out of the armor. Rosa read line by line, eyes sharp and kind. Who owns the story? She asked without looking up. Lyle blinked. The what? The story, Rosa said, tapping the paper. If you get to put your name on all the goodness, Eden Cafe, brought to you by, then we're the labor and you're the legend. If the trust holds the telling, we might be able to share a fence. Lyle stared at her then, very slowly nodded. We can put the trust's name first, he said. I can live with that. He added a note in the margin with a pen he pulled from behind his ear, a small, human gesture that made him look younger. Katie leaned forward. No buildings where the light thins, she said. Not just off-limits. It gets a circle that grows or shrinks with the gate. No paths cut through. No yoga mats in the rows. Done, Lyle said, surprising himself. He wrote, gate radius floating boundary, no intrusion. He underlined it. Brandon cleared his throat. And apprenticeships aren't just mops and break fix. You teach us how the systems work. You write it down. We could run the place if we wanted. Lyle considered, then wrote again. Apprenticeship scope, ops plus systems, doc required. Carol watched him write, relieved and wary at once. Deals have a way of shining on paper and rusting in air. She set her hand on Mr. Alder's notebook where it lay open to liturgy of tending, a counter-document with margins full of prayer. She didn't trust paper alone. She trusted tables. Before we sign anything, she said, eat here 3 days in a row, work with us 3 days in a row, say the names with us, water the least likely tree, tell one truth out loud that costs you something, then bring the same papers back and we'll read them like we read letters, out loud together. If they still sound right, we'll keep going. Silence. It wasn't a dare. It was a liturgy applied to contracts. Lyle looked at the shimmer, at the tags with names, at the dragon seat with its masking tape label. His careful face flickered, and for the second time in as many days, grief came to the front without permission. He placed his pen on the bench as if surrendering a weapon. 3 days, he said. Bread and names and water and truth, I can try. Trying is a liturgy too, Rosa said, and it sounded like a joke until it didn't. They set the papers aside and moved back into work because talking about fences is only useful if you build them. Brandon taught Lyle how to pump without jerking the handle. Lyle listened, got it wrong twice, then right. Katie showed him how to retie a tag without cracking the old wood. He fumbled, then smiled when the knot lay neat. Mr. Pike handed him the rake. Lyle raked badly, then adequately, then well enough to be left to it unsupervised. Rosa gave him a roll and pointed to the low wall. He broke it and left some for the bird with an earnestness that made even the sparrow seem to pause. Mid-afternoon, a patrol car rolled slowly past on the road and kept going. Nobody felt watched. Everybody felt seen. When the light had turned the leaves to thin gold coins, Carol walked to the second row. The shimmer held. She noticed something she hadn't before. Within the silver, where yesterday she'd seen a stump sending up shoots, one shoot had unfurled a single new leaf, no bigger than a thumbnail, green so clean it looked like water made into color. Hello, she said without meaning to, and the leaf seemed to shine for the length of a heartbeat. Back at the dragon seat, she found the little tin of honey they kept on the table and brushed a thin line along the bench back. Lyle watched, puzzled. Why? He asked. Because wood is a person if you give it a name, Katie said around a smile, and people get dry. He looked like a man who had not been offered a language he could love in a long time. Right, he said quietly. Right. They packed up with the sun. Rosa tucked the papers into her canvas bag, not to hide them, but to keep them from blowing away in a place where wind had opinions. Tomorrow, she said to Lyle, we start with names. Tomorrow, he echoed, and for once the word sounded more like hope than plan. At the gate, Carol paused with the key in her hand. One more thing, she said to nobody and everybody. She closed her eyes and pictured the blue post box, the letter waiting in its dark metal belly for the morning pickup. She imagined the postal clerk's hands, the sorting, the machines, the far address, a mailbox that didn't squeak like theirs. She pictured a man tired, older than his age, finding an envelope with no return name and opening it in a kitchen that had its own storms. "Whoever you are," she said, "there will be bread." She locked the gate. The click sounded like a violinist setting bow to string. They drove home under a sky rinsed clear. Brandon kept glancing in the mirror as if he could see the shimmer from here. Katie fell asleep with her chin on her sketchbook, a faint silver smudge on her thumb. Carol rested her palm flat on Mr. Alder's notebook and felt the steady weight of unflashy courage. Tomorrow would test them. Lyle would bring more than bread. He'd bring his past to the table or he'd run. Machines might show up. Wolves sniff. But tonight the letter was in the mail, the bread had been broke, and the gate, small, stubborn, bright, held. Across town, a postal truck parked under a streetlight, and a clerk swung the blue door wide. Metal on metal, envelopes shifting. Somewhere among the gas bills and catalogs lay Carol's white rectangle, steady as a seed under soil. And in the orchard at the edge of Eden, a leaf smaller than a thumbnail drank the last of the light and decided to grow. Chapter 8, The Harvest Nobody Owns, revised. They came back the next morning carrying the afterglow of what had already begun. A letter mailed, bread broken, and a promise. 3 days at the table before any pen touched a contract. The orchard received them the way a porch light receives a late return. Dew silvered the grass. The dragon seat shone faintly where Katie had brushed honey onto the grain. At the second row, the shimmer held small and steady. Within it, the thumbnail leaf they'd seen yesterday had uncurled a little more, an emerald comma finding its sentence. "Day 1, Rosa said, lifting Mr. Alder's notebook like a well-worn hymnal. "Names first." Lyle had come plain, as promised, boots with honest dirt, sleeves rolled, sunglasses tucked away like old habits. When Rosa offered the notebook, he didn't hesitate. He stood in the center of the row and read like a man introducing friends to one another. "D'Angelo, Parker, Singh, Mendoza, Rosa, don't let me cheat. Lee Wastler, Ortega, Martin, Yen, Piper." His voice faltered at Lee and steadied on Piper. Carol watched his mouth form her husband's name, the syllables handled with the care of someone touching a photograph. She felt, clearly, quietly, that mailing the letter had opened a place in her that sunlight now reached. "Least likely tree," Katie prompted, already scanning for the one that needed convincing. They chose a sulking Anjou that had refused to believe spring was for it. Brandon worked the pump with that even pull he'd learned from the week, no jerking, no forcing, and guided the first bucket to Katie like a surgeon passing an instrument. Water darkened the circle around the trunk. On the third pour, the leaves answered by lifting half a breath, as if a person in a sick room had decided to try a deeper inhale. "Bread before, bread after," Rosa said, and they tore the round Lyle had brought, still warm, cross-cut on top, and left a small heel for the sparrows. One of them took it with a hop, brazen and blessed. Then truth. Rosa nodded at Lyle the way she'd nod at anyone called unkindly. He didn't make a speech. He let the words land heavy and exact. "When I said I tended gates," he said, eyes on the shimmer, "I meant I closed them. My sister ran toward one like a home she'd been homesick for since childhood. We buried her. I spent years quieting places like this and called it mercy. I was good at it. It paid. I got praised." Silence knew where to stand and how long to stay. "I don't know yet how to do the other thing," he finished, jaw tightening around the admission. "I want to learn." The bees drew a wider circle around the shimmer, their hum dipping richer, not louder, richer, as if deepening to fit a truer note. The little seckel leaf inside the silver shivered once like a newborn startled and then settled. They worked. Day 1 ended with Lyle muddy to the ankles and a retied Mendoza tag that Katie declared, neat enough to keep with a grin that made him look unarmored for a second. When he left a piece of roll on the low wall, a sparrow hopped close enough to take it from his palm. "Welcome to the congregation," Rosa told him, patting his wrist. Day 2 did not ask before it tried to change the subject. A convoy arrived early. A flatbed, a backhoe, a white pickup with CARR partners. Site prep slapped across the door in a magnetic sign that made Mr. Pike grunt like a man who dislikes refrigerator magnets and metaphors equally. Survey stakes and test digs, the foreman called, clipboard in hand, genial and on schedule. Lyle surprised everyone, including himself, by stepping hard between the gate and the machines. "Not today," he said. "Not any day without the trust at the table." He jabbed a finger at the sign, then tapped his own chest. "That's mine, this is." The foreman blinked. "We've got permits, Mr. Carr." "My email is being revised," Lyle said, and the sentence sounded like a person changing jobs from the inside out. He didn't step aside. Carol felt how thin a human body is against steel and contracts. She rolled one honeyed dragon seat round into the lane and set it down as a clear, kind punctuation mark. Brandon added another. Katie printed table first on a strip of masking tape and slapped it to the gatepost with a decisiveness that made the foreman's eyebrows do a polite dance. Paper beat truck. Not always. Today, yes. The convoy performed an annoyed, careful three-point turn, the backhoe's bucket swinging like a sulky head, and left a dust wake that settled the way most urgent things do when met by stubborn hospitality. "That'll cost you," Mr. Pike told Lyle, half warning, half benediction. "Then let it," Lyle said, throat suddenly raw. They turned back to the liturgy as if a bird had flown through the open door, startled them, and gone out again. Names, water, bread, truth, Brandon, Flushing, and Brave. I want to be useful without being used. The shimmer thinned by a hair at the middle, the way ice thins at the first true thaw. Day 3 arrived with cinnamon in the air. Mrs. Mendoza's pie cooling on the dragon's seat like a crown end trouble in a slate suit. A sedan slid in smooth as language you can't quite argue with. A woman stepped out, posture built for courtrooms and planes. She didn't glance at the shimmer at first. She looked at Lyle with the calm of a person who has an email folder named breach. "Mr. Carr," she said, "we have capital deployed and expectations communicated. The wellness parcel is the only section with immediate return. The orchard is goodwill in the prospectus. I'm Teresa Bell. We move today." Rosa set a cup of water on the low wall. "Thirsty first," she said, not smiling. Teresa did look then, properly, at the Seckle brightness. Whatever she'd been told to expect, it wasn't a quiet fidelity that refused spectacle. Her eyes flickered, skeptic, then surprise, then something that looked like recognition she didn't care to admit. From the second truck, a trio of techs lifted sleek cases, the kind that carry instruments or intentions. Teresa lifted a hand. "Non-invasive scan and seal," she said to Lyle, the phrase polished by conference rooms. "It looks like prayer and plays like compliance." "I won't," Lyle said, and the words landed like a stake driven by a gentler man than the one who used to order closures. He did not step aside. Teresa's mouth tightened. "Then I will," she said, and took 2 steps toward the Seckle row. "Table first," Carol said, moving to meet her, Mr. Alder's notebook held in both hands like a firm kindness. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. "No decisions without bread." Teresa looked at the notebook, at the honeyed bench with masking tape labels, at the people who would not play defense with anger. She sat like a woman humoring a ritual, on the edge of the dragon seat, case on her knees. Rosa tore a roll and put the half into Teresa's palm with the same motion she used for communion. "Names," Rosa said, and nodded to Carol. They spoke them into the warm air. D'Angelo, Parker, Singh, Mendoza, Rosa, don't let me cheat, Lee Wastler, Ortega, Martin, Yen, Piper. Teresa's shoulders inched down a degree at Martin, then again at Yen's small tells of a human being hiding inside a job. "Truth," Rosa said now to Lyle. He didn't look at Teresa. He faced the shimmer. "I closed a gate in Ohio when I should have built a table," he said. "A boy stopped coming by. I told myself peace had been delivered. What I delivered was quiet. I want to ask the grieving what they need before I give them what I prefer and call it mercy." The silver brightened like a held breath allowed to go out. Inside it, the tiny leaf uncurled another notch. "Your turn," Rosa said to Teresa, not unkind. Teresa's jaw worked. "I grew up where chaos was called God moving," she said finally, clipped even in confession. "I like doors that click shut. I don't want to hurt anyone. I also don't know how to tell partners the trees said no without losing my job." "Tell them the trust said no," Lyle said. "Tell them story value rises with community ownership. Tell them legal risk drops when you don't fight the people who feed you. And tell them we'll sell a pie your cafe can't afford to make," Mr. Pike added, deadpan. Mrs. Mendoza lifted her tin and waggled the crust. Rosa nudged the wall. "And tell them you were fed," she said. "That counts." Teresa looked at the half-roll in her hand as if it were an instrument she did not know how to play. She took a bite. She did not die, she swallowed. "Draft the addendum," she said to Lyle, eyes still on the shimmer. "Trust first, floating boundary around whatever that is, apprenticeships with documented training, story credit to the trust. And what did you call it? The table clause." "No decisions without bread," Rosa said. "God help me," Teresa murmured, wry as a woman who half expects him to take her up on it. She flicked her fingers toward the techs. Not today. The cases were returned to the truck with a clatter that sounded to Carol like the closing of tools not needed. The air in the Seckel row cleared the way a room clears when someone opens a window. Nothing dramatic, just breath made easier. They moved from argument to work with the relief of a fever breaking. Brandon bolted the bench back into place, the wrench making that clean, ringing music he loved. Katie made a small wash of silver on her sketch, labeling it Seckel Gate, held. Teresa, feeling ridiculous and right, tied a fresh Parker tag under Katie's coaching and managed not to crack the bark. Lyle raked. He was bad, then adequate, then confidently invisible, high praise for raking. When the light slid toward Honey, Rosa spread the papers on the dragon seat and they read them aloud, clause by clause like liturgy. "Aldergate Trust holds first right and last word," Rosa intoned. "Floating boundary, no intrusion where light thins," Katie read, satisfied. "Apprenticeships include systems, knowledge, and written documentation," Brandon added, tapping the line he'd fought for. "Story credit led by the trust," Carol said, palm on Mr. Alder's notebook. "Table clause," Rosa finished, smiling. "No decisions without bread." They signed, not like celebrities, not like martyrs, like people who know a signature is the beginning of work. Carol wrote Carol Wastler with the same hand that had signed "If you ever come hungry, there will be bread." Brandon printed Brandon Wastler, apprentices with his tongue between his teeth, neat as a boy determined. Katie wrote Katie Wastler, keeper of the telling, and dotted the I with the tiniest pair. Mr. Pike made an X that looked exactly like a fence line U, trust. Mrs. Mendoza added a flourish and then immediately set a sign-up sheet for pie rotations. Lyle signed smaller than his usual, taking less space on purpose. Teresa Bell added her name with a period that felt like a key turned, firm, not final. They didn't cheer. They set the papers under the butter jar to cure like something handmade and went to water the least likely tree. Dusk drew the town in the way music draws kids to a lit room, pairs with casseroles, teens pretending they weren't moved, Mr. D'Angelo declaring the slices too small and fixing the problem. Someone tuned a guitar badly and then decently. Bees tucked themselves home. The Seckel shimmer held quiet court. Inside it, that stubborn leaf glowed the way watch hands do when you step into the dark. Carol moved through it all without rush. She tore bread and filled cups and put a steady hand on shoulders that needed it and didn't pull away when hands steadied her in return. When the moment came, she stood in the row and read the names again, this time adding two. Teresa Bell, who rolled her eyes and blushed, and Lyle Carr, who ducked his head like men do when blessing lands where they can feel it. She did not save Lee for last. She spoke his name in the middle, among the living, where it belonged. The gate brightened by the width of that decision. Stars started in their usual places, as if the sky had been practicing. Brandon touched her elbow, eyes on the bench, the barrels, the small hive. "I like this future," he said, quiet. "It still has bolts I can tighten." "Bring your wrench," Carol said, smiling with her whole face. Katie leaned on her and watched the leaf. "The little one," she whispered. "It's bigger again." "It is," Carol said. Rosa slid up, hands on hips, looking pleased and tired. "We'll need bylaws," she said, practical as a calendar. "And a washing up list. Put dragon seat, oil wood, and tell the truth on every week." "Done," Carol said. They closed the night the way good nights close, with a small, glorious mess. Plates to wash, crumbs for birds, kids yawning into elbows, Mr. Pike pretending to scold sticky hands on his rake and then cleaning it like a sacrament. At the gate, Carol set the iron key into the old lock. It turned with that not quite note she'd heard the first day. She looked back, because you always look back at rooms that have become more than rooms. The shimmer was only barely visible in the dark, but the leaf inside it answered the starlight with a pulse of its own. "Thank you," she said, to the orchard, to the town, to the letter traveling somewhere in the postal dark toward a kitchen she'd never see, to the God who had answered small prayers with slower miracles. "We'll be here." "Together," Brandon said, clicking the lower chain. "Together," Katie echoed, smoothing the green ribbon flat against the post. They walked to the car under a sky stitched with ordinary stars, the best kind. In the back seat, Katie fell asleep with her cheek on a sketch labeled letter plus loaf plus light. Brandon drove like someone who had work he loved in the morning. Carol rested her palm on Mr. Alder's notebook and felt the liturgy in her bones like a map folded to just the right page. At the edge of Eden. The gate stayed open the way doors stay open when people keep coming and bringing bread. The bees slept. The sap on the seckle not cured into a clear, honest scar. And the orchard, nobody and everybody's breathed in, breathed out, and kept singing that faint, patient song that teaches a town how to be one again. Chapter 9. The Breath Stands Up. By late afternoon, the orchard wore that gold that makes everything look like it was made on purpose. Carol set a loaf on the dragon seat, slid Mr. Alder's notebook beside it, and checked the seckle row out of habit. The silver, thin as breath, sure as it, held steady at knee height. Within it, the small leaf they'd been watching had grown to thumbnail size, green like water turned into color. Behind her, tires hissed on gravel. A white pickup nosed through the gate without asking, the magnetic asterisk car partners, site prep asterisk sign flashing like a badge. A flatbed rolled in after it. A sedan with tinted windows slid last, formal as a period. Men jumped down vests, cases, stakes. Teresa Bell stepped out, slate suit, taut mouth. She didn't scan for people, she scanned for compliance. "We're proceeding," she said, crisp as paper. "Survey, test bores, non-invasive closure. We've given adequate time for community input." She raised a hand to the techs. "Let's move." A second engine sounded, lower, familiar. Lyle's SUV turned onto Briar Hollow and tucked in behind the line of trucks. He parked quick and crooked, climbed out in work boots and a plain shirt. He was empty-handed except for a thermos and the dust of a long decision. Groans popped like weak floorboards. Mr. Parker muttered, "Well, that's that." Mr. Pike set his rake like a spear. Brandon's jaw set. Katie's fingers tightened around a roll. Even Rosa's face pinched before she smoothed it. "Lord, help us read right." "Lyle," Carol called, hurt and anger braided tight. "With them." He lifted both hands. "No," he said, voice rough. "I was coming to work." He glanced at the trucks, then at his ruined pocket where paper fibers clung like snow. "And I did this morning." He opened his palm. Torn contract confetti sifted down like dry rain. "I ripped it up. I belong here as it is. The table, not the renderings." Teresa didn't bother hiding her stare. "Mr. Carr," she said, "we have capital and counsel. Your feelings are not a clause." She turned to the techs. "Proceed." Two men swung their cases toward the seckle row, toward the shimmer. Metal clicked. Stakes lifted. "Stop!" Lyle stepped between them and the light with a heat that made Carol's stomach drop. He had learned to be gentle these last days. Now anger flared clean, not aimless. "No fence, no scan, no seal, not here." Teresa walked forward, cool, certain. "You don't run this," she said. "And this," she nodded toward the shimmer without really seeing it, "is exactly why we need risk controls." They squared off, Words sharpened. Tex shifted feet. A level clattered on the flatbed like a warning bell. Carol felt the orchard hold its breath. Then the breath stood up. The shimmer swelled, not spectacle, not a trick. Just more. It brightened to the color of rain on sunlit water. It rose to chest height, slid forward, and set itself between people and harm with the calm of someone who knows they don't have to shout to be obeyed. Wind moved in a line up the rows, leaves lifting like hands, not applause, agreement. The hive note deepened. The air itself said asterisk asterisk, no asterisk asterisk, without adding anyone in the saying. The tech with the case took one more step and met warmth. Not heat, asterisk warmth asterisk, like a hand on a fevered brow. He blinked, stopped, and stepped back without knowing why. The second man's knees wobbled. A third looked ashamed without a reason he could write down. Teresa's mouth opened and shut like a person who just remembered they had a mother who prayed for them. Holy, Mr. Parker managed, and then didn't finish it into a swear. Rosa's eyes shone. Holy Spirit, she said, nomming what had finally chosen to be obvious. The breath. Teresa found her voice and tried to paste it back into its folder. This is dangerous, she insisted, but softer, like someone repeating something she'd been told. It is, Rosa agreed, for lies. The shimmer brightened again, 1 quiet degree, and every argument in the lane lost its cleverness. The truck's engines ticked cooling. The level on the flatbed went still. Go on, Mr. Pike said to the builders, not unkind. This isn't your work. No one yelled. No one had to. The techs closed their cases with the embarrassed care of men putting tools away they didn't need. The drivers climbed back in. Teresa stared at the light one more long, unwilling second, then looked at Carol. I can write an addendum, she said, voice human now. Trust first, floating boundary around that, story credit to the trust, table clause, I can live with it. You can live because of it, Rosa said, not snide, just true. The trucks backed out in a shy ballet, dust rising, settling. Teresa's sedan paused at the gate. She rolled her window down enough to say, to no one and to someone, I'll bring pie, and drove. Silence exhaled. The shimmer dimmed. Carol's chest tightened. Is something wrong? She whispered, palm out, not touching, the way you check a sleeping child after a fever breaks. Rosa stepped to her side, equally alert. Sometimes presence is loud, she said softly. Sometimes it rests. The air answered. Not with thunder, a nearness that arrived exactly where fear likes to sit and told it to find another chair. The words weren't in Carol's ears. They bloomed where the ache had once hired an apartment. Be not afraid. Her knees went loose the way they had that night in the kitchen when the pair warmed under her hand. She nodded, unable to help the little laugh that came with relief. All right, she said. The shimmer settled back to knee height, the steady glow of a watch face in the dark. It drifted 3 paces toward the low run where water held, choosing a better place to listen from, guiding again. Lyle let out a breath that sounded like a man putting down a long weight. He turned to the gathered faces, suspicion, hunger, hope. They weren't with me, he said. I was just behind them, and I tore the contract. I'm staying because this place wants me to belong the way it is. He swallowed, rough. I feel welcome here, even when I don't deserve it. Rosa gave a small, bright nod. Welcome, she said. Now put those hands to use. Tablecloths doesn't clear brush. Laughter loosened everything that needed loosening. Brandon clapped Lyle's shoulder with a brother's economy. Mr. Pike scraped his rake against the ground like an amen. Katie passed Lyle a roll, and because she couldn't help it, said, bread first. They didn't chase a miracle. They honored one by working under it. As they reset the table, the shimmer began doing what it had been doing quietly all along. Only now everyone saw it. Guiding, it drifted toward a sulking Camas, hovering like a silver lantern choosing a doorstep. Least likely tree, Carol said, grinning through tears, and they watered slow and exact until the leaves lifted a fraction. Then another, like a shy person deciding to stand all the way up. Comforting, Mrs. Parker's boy stumbled near the irrigation run. The light slid between him and the ditch. He met warmth, corrected, stood blinking, unhurt, dignity intact. Convicting. Mr. D'Angelo reached for a crate too heavy for a man with a scar he always forgets. The shimmer eased to his elbow. He set it down as if it were his own idea and said aloud, "I'll save my back for pie." Pointing, a split limb waited 3 rows over. The breath idled there until Mr. Pike glanced up, frowned, and made a clean, blessed cut. "Thanks," he told the air, the way you thank a neighbor across a fence. Protecting, 2 bored teens slipped at the back fence with a can of something mean. Wind rose, not the kind that topples, the kind that stands asterisk. They stopped laughing, turned without cue, and left with eyes that stung for reasons they couldn't post. Teaching, when Lyle's phone buzzed with the old life, 3 times, insistent, the light hovered near his pocket like a steadying hand. He silenced it, slid it face down into Rosa's canvas bag, and said, "Table claws," like a man starting to love the rules that keep him free. They ate at last, bread before, bread after. Carol stood in the row with Mr. Alder's notebook open to asterisk liturgy of tending and spoke the names asterisk D'Angelo. Parker, Singh, Mendoza, Rosa, don't let me cheat, Lee Wastler, Ortega, Martin, Yen, Piper. She did not save asteriskly asterisk for last. She put him among the living where he belonged. The shimmer brightened by the width of that mercy. "Tell them what he is," Brandon said to Rosa, openly now, eyes on the light. Rosa counted on her fingers, teacher steady. "Holy Spirit, breath, helper, comforter, advocate, not a force you wield, a he who loves. He guides, comforts, convicts, protects, points. He was hovering before there were branches to stir. He opens gates and keeps fools from turning them into carnivals. He grows the right leaf at the right time. He says stop to wolves and go to wanderers. He reminds us truth plus bread beat control plus plans." The shimmer answered with scent, rain on dust asterisk. The first smell after a long dry. It filled Carol's chest the way air fills a room when someone finally opens a window. "What about the garden on the other side?" Carol asked, eyes on the silver as if peering into deep water. "Are we helping it?" Light brightened and she saw it clear, clearer than hints. A vine-covered wall warmed by sun at last. A path scuffed by returning feet, shoots around the old stump shouldering higher, leaves open like hands. The scent turned green and clean, like the first tear after you stop biting it back. "You mend here," the breath told them, not stealing mystery. "I mend there. We meet in the middle." That was enough. More would have been less. They closed the day like they always did. Least likely tree, water circling roots, names, bread, some left for birds. The shimmer, satisfied, slid toward the gatepost where the green ribbon hung. Carol tied it flatter. The light seemed pleased. Before she locked the gate, she reached her palm into the warm, cool space where presence had pressed, "Be not afraid," into her bones. "Thank you," she said, plain, "for saying no for us when we would have said yes, for staying." The shimmer curved toward her hand and warmed it without weight. "Keep tending," it said, not syllables, certainty. "Tomorrow," she promised. "Tomorrow," Rosa echoed, tucking the notebook away. "Tomorrow," Lyle said, glancing at the confetti still in his pocket and letting it go to the wind like seed. They walked to the car under a sky stitched with honest stars. Brandon drove like a person who has good bolts to tighten in the morning. Carol rested her palm on the notebook and felt the liturgy like a map folded to the right page. In the back seat, the town's faces played across the window, kept, not owned. At the edge of Eden, the breath hovered where water held, brightened at truths, dimmed its spin, stood against harm without hatting the people who brought it, moved when something new needed tending, guided, comforted, convicted, protected, and pointed. Holy patience inside a world that wants hurry. And the orchard, nobody, and everybody's, slept under that keeping the way a child sleeps better when a parent is in the doorway, not saying anything, just there.